It began with silence, the kind that only exists in the deep. The Atlantic lay still beneath a grey May sky, its surface cold and endless, its depths filled with ghosts. For nearly 4 years, this ocean had been a battlefield without borders, where ships vanished in the night, and where men lived and died beneath the waves. The German U-boats had ruled these waters, striking unseen, their torpedoes turning merchant convoys into burning tombs. Britain had come within weeks of starvation. The Allied war effort had depended on fragile lifelines stretched across the Atlantic, convoys of food, oil, and ammunition, hunted every hour by unseen predators. But in May 1943, something changed. The hunters became the hunted. The predators that once stalked the seas were suddenly dying faster than they could be replaced. The U-boat arm, the pride of Germany's Kriegsmarine, was broken in a single month. This is the entire history of Black May, 1943, the month the U-boats started dying, and the tide of the Battle of the Atlantic turned forever. For the German Navy, the Atlantic campaign had begun with promise and power. When the war broke out in 1939, Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the U-boat fleet, believed that a few hundred submarines could strangle Britain into submission. In those early years it seemed he was right. The U-boats were everywhere, stalking convoys from the North Sea to the Caribbean. The first years of the war became what U-boat crews called the happy time. In 1941 and 42, they sank ships faster than the Allies could build them. The U-boat was a weapon of terror, silent, invisible, and lethal. Each torpedo that struck sent not just ships, but hope itself to the bottom. For the men who sailed them, it was a life of glory and doom, long patrols in darkness, celebrated in propaganda, but haunted by the knowledge that few would survive the war. By 1943, the U-boat fleet had reached its peak. More than 400 submarines prowled the Atlantic. Dönitz had refined his tactics into deadly precision. He deployed his boats in Wolfpacks, coordinated by radio, converging on convoys detected by spotters and decrypted signals. When a convoy was found, dozens of U-boats would swarm it at night, firing torpedoes and diving before escort ships could react. It was a strategy that brought the Allies to the brink of collapse. But in war, technology moves faster than fear. Unseen by Dönitz and his men, the Allies had been changing the game. The first change came in the air. For years, the U-boats had surfaced at night to recharge batteries, believing the darkness protected them. But by early 1943, long-range patrol aircraft, the Liberators and Sunderlands, began covering the mid-Atlantic gap, equipped with new radar systems that could spot a submarine's conning tower from miles away. When the U-boats surfaced, they were no longer invisible. They were targets. The Allies introduced Lee lights, powerful searchlights that turned night into day, blinding crews before bombs fell. The ocean, once their refuge, became a killing field. Then came the escort carriers, small aircraft carriers that sailed with the convoys, launching fighters and bombers directly into the U-boats' hunting grounds. For the first time, Allied air power could follow the submarines wherever they went. On the surface, new destroyer escorts, equipped with radar and high-frequency direction finding, Huff-Duff could locate U-boat transmissions in seconds. Depth charges were replaced with Hedgehog mortars that fired patterns of explosives, detonating only on impact. The sonar grew sharper, the convoys sailed tighter, and the hunters who once felt untouchable began to realize they were being hunted themselves. The breaking of Enigma, Germany's unbreakable code, sealed their fate. At Bletchley Park, Allied cryptanalysts, led by Alan Turing and his team, had been reading the U-boat's encrypted messages for months. Every radio signal that Dönitz sent to his Wolfpacks, Every coordinate, every convoy order, was intercepted and deciphered. The Allies knew where the U-boats were going before they did, but to keep their advantage secret, they acted carefully, sometimes allowing convoys to be attacked, so the Germans would not suspect. The result was a quiet slaughter, conducted with surgical precision. By May 1943, the change became undeniable. Convoys that once lost half their ships began crossing safely. The U-boats that once returned home to parades and medals now vanished without a trace. In that single month, the Kriegsmarine lost 41 U-boats, nearly one every day. Over 1,500 men went down with them, entombed in steel and silence. It was the worst month in the history of Germany's submarine fleet. Admiral Dönitz, once the architect of victory, was forced to recall his boats from the Atlantic. The proud Wolfpacks, the terror of the seas, were shattered. The ocean had turned against them. For the men inside those submarines, Black May was more than defeat. It was revelation. The Atlantic that had once seemed limitless now felt like a trap. The sound of sonar pings echoed through the hull like a heartbeat. Every noise could mean death. Every dive could be the last. Crews lived in constant dread, their faces hollow, their uniforms soaked in sweat and oil. They spoke in whispers, listening for the distant hum of propellers that might be coming for them. When a submarine was found, the attacks were merciless. Depth charges shook the boats like earthquakes. Pipes burst, lights failed, the air filled with smoke and panic. Some crews surfaced and surrendered. Most did not. The ocean swallowed them in silence. For the Allies, Black May was a turning point, a moment of vindication after years of fear. Convoy after convoy reached Britain safely. Food, weapons, and fuel flowed once more. The merchant sailors, once the most endangered men of the war, finally saw the horizon without dread. In London, Churchill breathed easier. In Berlin, Dönitz faced the unthinkable. His fleet, his dream, was dying. He withdrew his U-boats from the Atlantic, hoping to rebuild, to create new designs that could survive the onslaught. But the magic was gone. The Battle of the Atlantic, the longest and most critical campaign of the war, was effectively over. The Allies had won, not by sheer numbers, but by outthinking their enemy. Black May did not just mark the defeat of the U-boats, it marked the end of an era. The submarine, once the terror of the seas, had met its match in intelligence, coordination, and technology. The men who served beneath the waves did so with courage and conviction, but courage alone could not save them from the weight of progress. When the war ended 2 years later, over 30,000 U-boat sailors were dead, more than 70% of those who served. No branch of any military suffered higher losses. Their graves were the deep, silent, cold, and eternal. Today the Atlantic lies calm once more. The convoys have long since vanished, replaced by cargo ships that cross in peace. But beneath the waves, the wrecks remain, hundreds of U-boats lying where they fell, their hulls covered in rust and coral. They are monuments to the futility of domination, to the cost of war, and to the month when the tide turned forever. The ocean remembers what men forget. Black May was not a battle of heroes or villains. It was a battle of endurance, of knowledge, of unseen struggle in the coldest theatre of war. It was the moment when humanity's reach for mastery met the limits of survival and lost. Tonight, we return to those dark waters, to the endless Atlantic, to the sonar echoes, and the quiet hum of diesel engines beneath the waves. This is the entire history of Black May, 1943, the month the U-boats started dying, the month the hunters became the hunted, and the month when silence claimed its victory over steel. Before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you tuning in from, and what time is it for you tonight? Are you listening beneath quiet skies, far from the cold waves of the Atlantic, or drifting into sleep as the ghosts of the deep whisper their story once more? Wherever you are, take a deep breath, settle in, and let me know. I'd love to hear where in time and place you're joining us from tonight. May 1st, 1943, North Atlantic Ocean, 50 kilometers southeast of Greenland. Dawn revealed a carpet of oil slicks stretching across 3 square miles of open water, with lifeless bodies drifting among the waves and shattered rafts. These were the remains of U-boat attacks gone wrong, Wolfpacks torn apart by escorts armed with depth charges and radar. In the previous 31 days, 41 German submarines had been sunk, 1/4 of Admiral Karl Dönitz's operational fleet. No single month of the war had ever cost the U-boat Waffe so much, so quickly, and so irreversibly. In official reports, the phrase Black May began appearing in both Allied and German files almost simultaneously. For years, U-boats had prowled these same waters as hunters, forcing convoys to scatter in panic. Now, in May 1943, the very same ocean turned against them. The hunters had become the hunted, and the war beneath the waves would never be the same again. At the heart of this collapse stood Admiral Karl Dönitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Kriegsmarine's U-boat arm, who had built the submarine fleet into Germany's most feared weapon. His concept of Rudeltaktik, Wolfpack tactics, was designed in 1940 to overwhelm convoys by massing 10 to 15 submarines against a single target group. Each Type 7 U-boat displaced 769 tons, carried 14 torpedoes, and could dive to depths of 200 meters. On paper, these boats represented the perfect predators, fast enough to close, small enough to disappear, and lethal enough to destroy a freighter with one well-placed shot. In 1942 alone, U-boats had sunk over 6 million tons of Allied shipping, a figure that seemed to guarantee Britain's starvation. BDU situation reports from December 1942 still spoke of victory within reach. Yet within 5 months, the confidence of those documents would be disproved at sea. The Atlantic was shifting under Dönitz's command, and his war diary began to reflect doubts he had never voiced before. The change can only be understood in contrast with the second happy time of 1942, when U-boats hunted unopposed along the American eastern seaboard. At that point, American convoys were disorganized, escorts too few, and coastal blackouts poorly enforced. German commanders like Otto Kretschmer and Günther Prien reported kills with clinical efficiency, sending cables that listed freighters by tonnage, cargo, and grid reference. By comparison, May 1943 painted an inverted picture. Allied escorts now steamed in tight screens, supported by long-range consolidated B-24 Liberators and VLR, very long-range Sunderlands. Where once convoys scattered under attack, they now turned into the fight, employing Hedgehog projectors and improved depth charge patterns. A weapon once considered invincible had met an opponent that was learning, adapting, and applying industrial resources at scale. The balance was tilting from German initiative to Allied control. In less than a year, advantage had switched sides in the Atlantic. The statistics from Black May illustrate the collapse with brutal clarity. 41 U-boats destroyed meant roughly 2,000 men killed, their boats turned into twisted iron coffins on the seabed. By comparison, Allied losses in merchant shipping that month fell to just under 300,000 tons, less than half the previous year's monthly average. British Admiralty assessments calculated that U-boat attrition now exceeded replacement rates by 30%. The BDU's daily log entries, known as Kriegstagebücher, recorded repeated instances of U-boats being lost without explanation, Boats that never returned a signal, never surfaced, simply vanished. Escort commanders noted this reversal in their after-action reports, stating that enemy morale appears to falter. Each wreck was more than steel and rivets. It was a signal that the Wolfpacks could no longer dictate the tempo. The sea that had once concealed them now betrayed their presence. The tactical situation was deteriorating beyond repair. Churchill himself grasped the stakes of May 1943 with unusual clarity. In his personal diary, the Prime Minister recorded that the only thing that really frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril. That fear was not literary flourish. British food reserves had dwindled dangerously in early 1943, with Convoy PQ-17's disaster still fresh in memory. Yet in the war rooms of Whitehall, May marked a turning point when graphs of tonnage lost and U-boats destroyed finally crossed. The change was not accidental. It resulted from new technologies, centimetric radar, Huff-Duff, high-frequency direction finding, and the breaking of Enigma traffic at Bletchley Park. Every convoy battle became a test of whether intelligence, air cover, and escort doctrine could hold against Wolfpack assault. The results spoke for themselves. Where once Britain feared strangulation, it now saw the possibility of keeping supply lines secure across the Atlantic. The German response revealed both technical frustration and operational desperation. Dönitz ordered more boats to sea, attempting to replace lost units by pushing training flotillas into combat duty. Type 7 and Type 9 boats now faced aircraft armed with rockets, lee lights, and sonobuoys, technologies unknown in 1941. In BDU messages intercepted by the Allies, commanders described unprecedented levels of detection, with U-boats attacked while still on approach to convoys. The tactical solution, longer dives and reduced radio traffic, only eroded the Wolfpack's ability to coordinate. In post-war analysis, Allied anti-submarine experts concluded that German command had no countermeasure adequate to the convergence of air power and intelligence. U-boats had not become less lethal. The battlefield itself had changed. The Atlantic was no longer an empty ocean, but a grid of patrolled and monitored sea lanes. For Dönitz, this meant his core doctrine was breaking apart before his eyes. The human consequences were stark, and they revealed themselves in small, grim details. Survivors pulled from lifeboats after depth charge runs spoke of hatches jammed shut, pressure hulls imploding, and crews drowning in darkness. Escort officers described the sight of men clinging to wreckage, waving frantically, only to vanish in the swell. German families received terse telegrams, missing in action presumed lost. Within a single month, thousands of such notices were sent across Germany, tearing holes in towns and villages where U-boat crews had been celebrated as heroes. The Kriegsmarine's propaganda machine tried to mask the losses, releasing newsreels that emphasized Allied sinkings rather than German deaths. But in BDU headquarters at Kerneville near Lorient, the reality could not be disguised. The operational charts showed red ink spreading across the Atlantic. Each lost boat represented not just men, but the shattering of a strategic dream. By the end of May 1943, even Admiral Dönitz privately acknowledged that the tide had turned. His war diary recorded the bitter admission, "We are suffering heavy losses. We must withdraw." For the first time in the Atlantic campaign, the U-boat fleet stood on the defensive, forced to retreat from convoy routes it once dominated. Black May did not end the Battle of the Atlantic outright, but it made victory impossible for Germany. The Wolfpacks had been broken not by one weapon, but by the combined force of code-breaking, air power, radar, and escort innovation. The question now was not whether the U-boats could win, but how long they could endure. For Britain and the United States, The crisis of supply was finally easing. For Germany, a decisive weapon had been blunted beyond repair, and for the ocean itself, May 1943 was the moment when the water turned red and the hunters were no longer in control. October 18th, 1940, North Atlantic, 50 kilometers south of Rockall. Kapitän-Leutnant Heinrich Bleikrod aboard U-40-8 peered through the conning tower optics at the lights of Convoy SA-7 breaking the horizon. 20 merchant ships plodded westward in loose formation, escorted by a single sloop, HMS Scarborough, her pennant number L25 barely visible in the mist. At 20 knots on the surface, the Type 7B submarine closed distance silently, diesel engines vibrating the steel deck beneath the commander's boots. In the BDU bunker at Kurneval, near Lorient, Admiral Karl Dönitz tracked the convoy's position on wall charts marked with colored pins and grease pencil. Radio signals flashed back and forth on Enigma, reporting bearing, speed, and tonnage of prey. Within hours, more boats converged, creating the first true Rudel tactic Wolfpack strike against a convoy system. By dawn, 17 merchant ships lay burning or sinking, more than 70,000 gross tons destroyed in a single night. The ocean had become a battlefield, and Britain's lifeline was bleeding. The weapon behind these attacks was the Type 7 U-boat, the backbone of Germany's Atlantic campaign, displacing 769 tons surfaced and 871 tons submerged. The Type 7 could dive to 230 meters and remain under for 90 seconds from crash dive order. Powered by two-man M6 V4046 diesel engines, each producing 1,200 horsepower, the boat reached 17 knots on the surface and 7 knots submerged. 4 bow torpedo tubes and 1 stern tube carried a total of 14 torpedoes, each with a warhead weighing 280 kilograms. On deck, an 8.8 centimeter SKC Thar-35 naval gun with 100 rounds gave commanders the option to sink smaller ships without expending precious torpedoes. In practice, this combination of speed, firepower, and endurance made the Type 7 the most effective submarine class of the war. British escorts, limited in number and range, found themselves overwhelmed. The technical balance favored the hunters. The Wolfpack tactic itself represented a profound evolution from First World War practice. In 1917, unrestricted submarine warfare meant single boats stalking individual ships, striking opportunistically, and retreating alone. By contrast, Dönitz's Rudel tactic relied on central coordination from BDU headquarters, where convoys were spotted, shadowed, and attacked by groups of 10 to 15 submarines. This required discipline in radio reporting, which the Germans maintained through strict signals procedure and Enigma encryption. Against Britain's convoy system, designed in the interwar years to resist lone raiders, Wolfpacks imposed chaos by simultaneous multi-axis attacks. British escort captains reported being engaged on all sides, forced to choose between defending the convoy or chasing sonar contacts. The result was paralysis. A system designed for defense buckled under concentrated assault. The tactical doctrine of Convoy met its perfect predator in the Wolfpack. The results were devastating, particularly in 1942, known to German crews as the Second Happy Time. That year, U-boats sank over 6 million gross tons of Allied shipping, including more than 600 merchantmen. Convoys off the American eastern seaboard were particularly vulnerable. Lights from coastal cities silhouetted targets against the horizon, turning the shoreline into a hunting ground. Otto Kretschmer, nicknamed Silent Otto, sank 47 ships, totaling more than 270,000 tons before his capture. Günther Prien, famed for penetrating Scapa Flow in U-47 in October 1939, became a national hero, his portrait displayed in recruiting offices across Germany. BDU war diaries recorded kill totals in precise tonnage, a grim ledger of industrial destruction. Each entry confirmed Dönitz's belief that Britain could be strangled into submission. The battlefield evidence supported his conviction. The broader implications became clear in Whitehall, where Winston Churchill watched shipping graphs climb with mounting anxiety. In the first half of 1941, merchant losses exceeded 3 million tons, while new construction in British yards struggled to replace even half that figure. Shipping experts at the Ministry of War Transport warned that if losses continued at the current rate, Britain would face critical shortages of grain, oil, and steel within 12 months. The Wolfpacks were not just sinking ships, they were threatening the survival of an island nation. Dönitz calculated that monthly destruction of 700,000 tons would bring Britain to her knees. By mid-1941, that figure seemed achievable. The implication was unavoidable. Germany's undersea fleet could succeed where the Luftwaffe had failed in the skies. British recognition of the threat was immediate, though solutions lagged. Escort groups were reinforced, yet their ASIC sonar, effective only against submerged targets, failed to detect U-boats attacking on the surface at night. German commanders exploited this flaw ruthlessly, driving into convoys at 17 knots, with deck guns blazing. Naval staff papers such as Admiralty War Diary entries from October 1941 described night attacks with near impunity. Survivors recalled searchlights cutting across the waves, illuminating the conning towers of attacking submarines, but escorts unable to close fast enough. The enemy seemed invisible, invulnerable, and omnipresent. Post-war analysis concluded that Wolfpacks represented the greatest operational crisis faced by Britain in either war. The acknowledgement from the enemy underscored the scale of Germany's temporary advantage. For U-boat commanders, the experience was both intoxicating and brutal. KTB entries from U-99 described the thrill of torpedo detonations echoing through the hull, followed by the shock of counterattacks that shook bolts loose from bulkheads. Life aboard was cramped. 45 men crammed into a steel cylinder, with bunks shared on rotating shifts known as hot bunking. The air reeked of diesel, sweat, and mold. Yet the sense of achievement after a successful patrol outweighed discomfort. Crews returned to bases in Lorient, Saint-Nazaire, and Brest greeted by brass bands, flowers, and medals pinned by Gross Admiral Erich Raeder himself. For the men, this was proof that they were Germany's spear tip, but every successful mission deepened Britain's desperation, drawing both sides further into a battle that could not remain one-sided forever. By late 1942, the Wolfpacks had convinced Berlin that the U-boat was the decisive weapon of the war. Propaganda reels titled "Sieg im Atlantik" proclaimed inevitable victory, showing footage of torpedo strikes and cheering crowds. Dönitz's war diary, however, hinted at unease, noting growing Allied escort strength and the first signs of air patrols reaching mid-ocean. Still, the central question lingered: could anything stop the invisible enemy that prowled the Atlantic with such dominance? Britain's survival hung by the thread of convoys, and for a time that thread seemed destined to snap. Yet, even as Germany celebrated, new technologies, strategies, and intelligence breakthroughs were beginning to reshape the fight. The Wolfpacks had gathered, struck, and nearly triumphed. But the next chapter of the Battle of the Atlantic would reveal whether Britain could endure, and whether Germany's undersea hunters had already reached their high water mark. March 24th, 1941. Western approaches, 200 kilometers west of Ireland. Flight Lieutenant Arthur Moore guided a short Sunderland flying boat, serial number N9023, across grey swells stretching to the horizon. Below, a convoy of 30 merchantmen moved like ants scattered over a blue tablecloth, their wakes weaving thin white trails across the ocean. From 2,000 feet, the Sunderland's crew spotted a periscope cutting the waves before disappearing beneath the surface. Depth charges were armed and released, but the enemy slipped away unscathed. The official Coastal Command Combat Report No. 74 recorded contact lost, probable U-boat evaded. For the airmen, the frustration was palpable. They could see the convoys they protected. They could glimpse their attackers, yet the Atlantic's vastness and their aircraft's limitations meant safety remained elusive. The sea and sky were allies only in appearance, not yet in practice. The fundamental problem was range. The short Sunderland, with its 4 Bristol Pegasus XVV radial engines, generating 1,060 horsepower each, could patrol 1,500 kilometers from base. That endurance was sufficient for operations along the British coast, but far too short to reach the mid-Atlantic, where convoys crossed without cover. The consolidated B-24 Liberator, when finally made available in numbers, carried more than 9,000 litres of fuel, and stretched its range to over 3,000 kilometers, twice that of the Sunderland. Yet in 1941 and early 1942, few Liberators were assigned to Coastal Command, as American and RAF Bomber Command priorities diverted them elsewhere. This left the air gap, a deadly rectangle between Greenland, Iceland, and the Azores, unguarded. For U-boat commanders, that region became a sanctuary. For convoys, it was a graveyard. The contrast between protected and unprotected zones was stark. Admiralty shipping statistics from late 1941 showed that convoys operating under consistent air cover lost an average of less than 1 ship per passage. In the mid-ocean gap, however, losses soared to more than 6 ships per convoy, sometimes more than 100,000 tons in a single week. British escort captains knew that once their charges moved beyond Sunderland range, Wolfpacks would strike. In this way, technology dictated survival. An aircraft with insufficient legs left entire convoys exposed. The Germans understood this imbalance perfectly. BDU war diaries described the air gap as free hunting ground, a rare acknowledgement of enemy weakness. The sky had become the missing weapon in the Allied arsenal. Field evidence from aircrews illustrated both promise and limitation. On April 12, 1941, a Sunderland from No. 10 Squadron RAF encountered U-26 near the Bay of Biscay. The crew dropped 4 depth charges, one striking within 20 meters of the diving boat, forcing it to surface. The U-boat limped away damaged, but weather and range prevented follow-up. Coastal Command reports estimated more than 200 such sightings between 1941 and early 1942, yet only a fraction resulted in confirmed kills. Aircraft could find the enemy, but rarely finished the job. Each patrol ended with the same bitter conclusion: protection without decisive destruction. The gap between detection and elimination remained lethal. The implications of this struggle became clear to Sir Frederick Bowhill, appointed Air Officer Commanding-in-Chief of Coastal Command in June 1941. Bowhill pressed the Air Ministry for more long-range aircraft, warning that the ocean's centre remains undefended and our losses mount. His appeals were often rejected in favour of Bomber Command's campaign over Germany. The bureaucratic tug-of-war meant convoys continued to cross a killing zone without aerial shield. Only in late 1942 did the United States Army Air Forces agree to loan additional B-24 Liberators to close the gap. By May 1943, Coastal Command had finally amassed sufficient squadrons to blanket the Atlantic center with sustained coverage. The strategic tide was beginning to turn. Air could finally meet sea. Technology accelerated the transformation. The air-to-surface vessel radar, ASV Mach-3, operating at 10-centimeter wavelength, penetrated German Metox receivers and rendered U-boats blind to approaching aircraft. At night, the Lee Light, a 2.5 million candle power searchlight mounted beneath the wing of a Wellington or Liberator, illuminated submarines caught on the surface recharging batteries. A typical engagement saw radar detecting a U-boat from 20 kilometers, the aircraft closing silently, and the Lee Light snapping on at less than 1 kilometer. The sudden glare left crews stunned, seconds before depth charges crashed into the sea. Admiral Dönitz himself admitted in post-war testimony that radar and Lee Light combination robbed us of the night. What had been sanctuary became trap. For the crews, the human consequences were immediate. Flying 12-hour patrols over endless ocean tested endurance to breaking point. Aircraft like the Liberator, with a wingspan of 33 meters, could carry 8 crewmen and patrol vast sectors, but fatigue gnawed at concentration. Men scanned the waves for hours, eyes stinging from salt haze, each flicker of white mistaken for a periscope. Diaries from Squadron 120 recorded searching, always searching, days without sighting, then suddenly the black cross of a U-boat breaking the swell. Victories were rare but unforgettable. Every kill meant dozens of ships spared, yet the toll was heavy, and losses to flak and weather claimed nearly as many lives as combat. The Atlantic remained merciless to both predator and protector. By May 1943, the combination of Liberator range, ASV Mach-3 radar, and the Lee Light closed the air gap, once thought unbridgeable. That month, shipping losses outside air cover plummeted by 50%, while U-boat casualties doubled. The sanctuary of the Central Atlantic was gone, and with it, German dominance at sea. The dramatic question now shifted. If aircraft had made the ocean smaller, could intelligence make it transparent? As the Wolfpacks found no refuge above the waves, the battle would move into the shadows of code-breaking rooms and radio intercept stations. The air had claimed its place in the struggle. The next fight would be for the invisible war of signals. October 20th, 1942. Bletchley Park, Buckinghamshire, England. Alan Turing hunched over a wooden desk in Hut 8, serial number 8/23, the whirring of an early bomber machine filling the room with metallic rhythm. Sheets of intercepted naval messages lay scattered across the floor, each ciphered in the complex settings of the 4-rotor Enigma introduced that year. Outside, rain streaked the windows, but inside, a team of mathematicians, linguists, and clerks tracked every letter and rotor configuration with meticulous care. Turing adjusted the bomber drum settings once again, searching for the daily key that would expose BDU orders. Moments earlier, a signal had arrived, intercepted by the Admiralty's Y stations. Attack convoy HX-229, bearing west-southwest, 2300 hours. The urgency was palpable. Decoding meant life or death for thousands of sailors. Every second wasted increased the danger. The invisible battle of minds had begun. The technical challenge was formidable. The 4-rotor Kriegsmarine Enigma produced more than 100 billion possible configurations daily, each combination depending on rotor order, ring settings, plugboard connections, and initial rotor positions. Polish cryptographers notably Marian Rejewski, had laid the foundation in 1932 with mathematical insights that allowed the bomber concept to exist. Turing and his colleagues adapted these methods, automating the search for daily keys and exploiting predictable message patterns, known as cribs. The practical effect was profound. A single decrypted message could reveal the position of multiple U-boat Wolfpacks and their intended targets. Compared to World War I unrestricted submarine warfare, when intelligence was almost entirely human observation, this represented an unprecedented advantage. Where once convoys relied on luck, now they moved with foresight. The ocean remained deadly, but the edge was shifting. The contrast between Allied and German systems could not have been more pronounced. BDU's Enigma traffic was presumed unbreakable, producing messages that changed with each key setting every 24 hours. German crews trusted in mechanical perfection and discipline, confident that no cipher would survive analysis. Meanwhile, at Bletchley Park, Turing and his colleagues combined computation, human intuition, and raw observation to render the impossible possible. While the U-boat fleet operated in darkness, the Allies illuminated its intentions in advance. The difference was not merely mechanical, it was strategic. One side acted blindly, the other with insight. The calculus of advantage was no longer industrial, but intellectual. Evidence of success arrived in October 1942, when HMS Petard, commanded by Captain Frederick Dalrymple Hamilton, boarded U-559 off Port Said. Sailors retrieved vital Enigma codebooks and a short signal instruction manual, despite the vessel flooding and enemy fire. The KTB log entry for the capture noted, material sufficient to restore UFI decrypts of Kriegsmarine signals. Within hours, analysts at Bletchley Park began feeding the recovered data into their bomb sequences. Subsequent intercepts confirmed accuracy. For the first time in weeks, BDU orders could be read almost as they were written. This tangible recovery demonstrated that intelligence could operate as a weapon in its own right. The gap between detection and anticipation had been closed. The implications for convoy operations were immediate. Ship losses before the restoration of ultra access had averaged more than 500,000 tons per month in the North Atlantic. Yet, in the months following October 1942, losses dropped to under 300,000 tons per month. Admiralty dispatches instructed convoy commanders to adjust routes, speeds, and escort formations based on decoded BDU messages. The human consequence was profound. A single decrypted signal could redirect dozens of ships away from Wolfpack ambushes, sparing hundreds of lives. Strategically, the Allies had created a force multiplier unmatched in naval history. Knowledge had become a weapon as lethal as torpedo or deck gun. The Atlantic's balance was quietly, invisibly, shifting. Additional evidence confirmed the broader operational value of codebreaking. Reports from NOMA 120 Squadron RAF and escort group logs noted U-boats turning back or missing convoys entirely, without engaging. Post-war analyses of BDU records compared sinkings before and after U-ultra access, showing a reduction in losses of nearly 40%. Even the Germans acknowledged in intercepted communications a sense of increased Allied anticipation, complaining of unaccountable maneuvers by convoys. The pattern was unmistakable. Cryptanalysis was reshaping battles long before aircraft or escorts could intervene. Information had become preemptive action. The war at sea was now fought in minds as much as in steel. For the Bletchley Park staff, the work was exhausting, exhilarating, and secret. Clerks manually logged rotor settings. Mathematicians scribbled permutations on blackboards, and Turing monitored every bomber operation for signs of failure. Hours stretched into days, and yet every success remained classified. No congratulatory letter could be sent to the sailors who were saved. The weight of responsibility was immense. A missed key could result in convoy disaster and hundreds of deaths. Personal diaries recall hours spent staring at letters, knowing unseen lives depended on correct interpretation. The stakes were psychological as well as operational. Each breakthrough was measured not in medals, but in lives preserved across the ocean. By late 1942, the capture of U-559 and restoration of U-Ultra access had made cryptanalysis a decisive factor in the Atlantic. BDU orders could be anticipated, Wolfpack positions mapped, and convoys rerouted with precision. Yet the dramatic question remained, could the U-boat arm adapt faster than Bletchley Park could read their signals? The invisible war of intelligence and technology would converge in 1943, combining code-breaking, radar, long-range aircraft, and escort innovation. The Atlantic remained perilous, but now the Allies had a map of its dangers written in German ink. The next chapter would follow these converging threads, as technology and intelligence began to close the gap, threatening the once invincible hunters beneath the waves. March 17, 1943, Mid-Atlantic, Convoy HX-229, CES 122, ploughed through grey swells under a low overcast sky, the scent of salt and coal thick in the air. Merchant sailor Robert Whittaker, aboard the British freighter SS Carlton, gripped the railing as the horizon swelled with dark shapes, 90 U-boats of Wolfpacks, Robgraf, Sturmer and Drenger, converging like predators circling prey. Radio silence had been imposed, but by mid-afternoon, desperation forced crackling SOS transmissions into the ether, their messages punctuated by static and fear. Fire and smoke erupted along the convoy's starboard side as torpedoes struck, flames licking the decks of the Norwegian cargo vessel SS Morsund. The crew huddled below deck, listening to the groan of stressed hull plates as explosions rattled the ship. The Admiralty's Convoy Battle Report number 221 logged the chaos. 22 ships sunk, totaling 146,000 tons of shipping. Dönitz orchestrated the attack from his flagship headquarters, BDU messages coordinating the spread and timing of torpedo salvos. The Atlantic was a chessboard, and March 1943 its most lethal opening. Technically, the U-boats leveraged both numbers and coordination. Type 7 and Knight submarines carried 14 torpedoes each, capable of traveling up to 7,000 meters at 44 knots, and communicated through encrypted Enigma messages. Wolfpack tactics required precise timing. U-boats patrolled in picket lines across hundreds of kilometers, relaying convoy sightings to BDU, which then vectoring attacks to the closest submarines. Radar detection on the Allied escorts remained primitive, with Type 271 centimetric radars just being introduced on destroyers, giving limited early warning. Convoy SC-122, spanning 29 merchant vessels, relied on only 10 corvettes and 3 destroyers for protection, each with a top speed of 25 knots, insufficient to respond to multiple simultaneous threats. Technical limitations in sonar and high-frequency direction finding left gaps, exploited by the Germans. The result was devastating precision. The operational environment magnified the U-boat advantage, with numbers and technology combining lethally. The comparison between Allied and German systems highlighted systemic vulnerability, where the U-boats operated with centralized command and shared intelligence. Convoys depended on fragmented communication and reactive tactics. Escorts could engage a single contact effectively, but 90 U-boats attacking across different sectors overwhelmed defensive measures. In World War I, convoys had been less organized and U-boats less coordinated. Here, efficiency met mass. The human element compounded the disparity. German crews trained for night attacks and submerged approach, while Allied sailors faced exhaustion from weeks at sea, scanning the horizon for periscopes invisible against grey waters. The contrast in initiative was stark. BDU directed, the Allies responded. Command advantage shaped every outcome. Field evidence confirmed the scale of destruction. After the night of March 18th, Captain Whitaker's log noted smoke on every bearing, cries from 20 ships, fire reaching 20 meters above deck. Depth charge patterns from destroyers detonated too late or too far, leaving torpedoes to strike unimpeded. Post-war BDU reports corroborated the number of hits. 22 merchant vessels sunk, including the SS Empire Hudson and SS Murmansk, totaling 146,000 tons lost. The naval logs of HMS Hesperus documented constant maneuvering to shield stragglers, often at the cost of exposing themselves to torpedo attack. Air cover remained minimal. Only sporadic patrols of Hudson bombers provided fleeting deterrence. The evidence was overwhelming. March 1943 marked the peak of German naval success in the Atlantic. The broader implications were undeniable. Admiralty internal communications from March 22nd warned that convoy losses had reached unsustainable levels, prompting urgent calls for more long-range aircraft, additional corvettes, and radar-equipped destroyers. Ship tonnage lost in March 1943 exceeded that of January and February combined, foreshadowing the crisis ahead. Dönitz, confident in Wolfpack tactics, believed Britain might be starved into submission, yet analysts at Bletchley Park already began noticing subtle patterns in U-boat transmissions. The convergence of intelligence, aircraft, and improved escort technology would soon alter these calculations. March demonstrated the peak threat and the necessity for decisive change. Convoy survival would increasingly depend on innovation as much as bravery. Additional evidence highlighted the scale of coordination required by BDU. Logs revealed that Robgraf maintained a patrol line spanning 200 kilometers, while Sturmer and Drenger maneuvered to intercept independent convoys simultaneously. Radio transmissions, encrypted with 4-rotor Enigma machines, allowed Dönitz to redirect units in real time, an operational capability unmatched by the Allies. In contrast, the convoy escort commanders relied on limited HF/DF stations, giving detection ranges of only 30 kilometers under optimal conditions. The operational asymmetry magnified losses. Even the introduction of short-range radar on corvettes could not compensate for the deficit in numbers or the strategic foresight of the German command. BDU's orchestration converted tactical skill into strategic success. The human consequences were devastating. Merchant sailors endured explosions, fire, and smoke, while crammed into lifeboats, rationing water and praying in freezing Atlantic temperatures. Survivors from the SS Carleton reported hypothermia setting in within 20 minutes, dozens succumbing before rescue arrived. Morale collapsed as SOS signals crackled across the radio, often unanswered until nearby escorts arrived. Crew diaries from convoy HX-229 CES A-122 describe flares over burning ships, shouts in the wind, the endless rolling waves swallowing men. Even victorious U-boat crews faced fatigue and stress, patrolling for days in cramped steel tubes with limited sleep, torpedo tubes primed but often missing targets in stormy conditions. The battle was measured not only in tonnage lost, but in shattered lives. Survival was a matter of timing, courage, and chance. By late March 1943, the longest convoy had demonstrated both the zenith of German U-boat power and the vulnerabilities of Allied maritime defense. The losses shocked military planners, but also prompted rapid adaptation, additional aircraft, radar improvements, and improved coordination among escorts began to take shape. March represented a high water mark, a foretaste of what could be prevented in the following months. The dramatic question arose: if this was the worst month for the Allies, how would May become the turning point? Convoys would survive, U-boat mortality would rise, and the ocean that had seemed so lethal would shift. The Atlantic's balance was about to be rewritten, as technology, intelligence, and tactics converged in the coming weeks. May 1st, 1943, North Atlantic, 55 nautical miles northwest of the Azores, HMS Duncan rolled in heavy seas as Captain Johnny Walker observed sonar pings echoing off steel hulls. Depth charge patterns slammed into the hull of U-231, the reverberations shaking the escort deck plates and sending clouds of brine into the air. Ahead, USS Bogue launched a Wildcat aircraft, its radar sweeping the waves, identifying a periscope near the convoy's starboard flank. Hedgehogs, ahead-throwing anti-submarine mortars, were readied for the first attack run, firing 24 projectiles simultaneously with a calculated probability of 1 in 4 for a kill. The ocean, once a hunting ground for German U-boats, had begun to resemble a trap, the hunters now being hunted. Orders crackled over the radio network connecting escort groups, each unit adjusting position to create overlapping kill zones. Captain Walker, reviewing sonar echoes, noted, "Contact steady, bearing 090, depth 50 meters. The new Doctrine transformed defensive vessels into offensive instruments, closing the tactical gap that had favored the Kriegsmarine for 3 years. Technically, the Hedgehog represented a revolutionary shift in anti-submarine warfare. Each projectile carried a 75-kilogram charge with contact fuses, designed to detonate only on impact, unlike depth charges which relied on proximity and had only a 7% kill probability per salvo. HMS Duncan's sonar, Type 144 ASIC, provided continuous depth tracking, allowing precise firing calculations to be fed into the Hedgehog's targeting system. By comparison, earlier escort tactics in 1941 relied almost exclusively on reactive depth charges, often dropped behind the convoy, with target vessels already escaping. The practical consequence was immediate. U-boat crews could no longer surface to attack at night with impunity, and the survival odds in the Black Pit dropped dramatically. Radar-equipped aircraft from USS Bogue extended coverage, combining sonar data with visual spotting, increasing kill probability for hunter-killer groups. Coordination between sea and air units multiplied tactical efficiency. Operationally, technology now dictated initiative. The contrast between Allied hunter-killer doctrine and the German Wolfpack approach was stark. U-boats, designed for stealth and attrition, relied on surprise, night surface attacks, and communications encryption. Escorts, in contrast, now combined multiple detection systems, air reconnaissance, and aggressive engagement protocols, effectively turning the Atlantic into a gauntlet. Whereas BDU's earlier success depended on the Allies' inability to react, the hunter-killer groups forced U-boats to adapt under constant threat. Tactical flexibility shifted. German commanders could no longer dictate the terms of engagement, and any misstep in maneuvering or communication could be fatal. Allied integration of intelligence and technology created an environment where initiative resided with the hunters rather than the hunted. The strategic momentum was tilting. Field evidence confirmed the doctrine's effectiveness. On May 3rd, HMS Duncan's Hedgehog salvo struck U-231 at a depth of 53 meters, hull rupture confirmed by oil and debris surfacing within minutes. USS Bogue's aircraft simultaneously damaged the U-boat's periscope and conning tower, further compromising maneuverability. U.S. Navy After-Action Report 431 detailed this engagement as the first successful combined sonar, Hedgehog, and airstrike, resulting in a confirmed kill, without a single Allied casualty. Previous depth charge attempts in the same area had failed multiple times over a span of 72 hours, highlighting the new tactic's efficiency. Escort coordination was now codified in tactical manuals, standardizing aggressive patrol patterns for all Atlantic convoys. Training drills emphasized rapid detection, immediate target acquisition, and synchronized multi-platform attacks. Results were measurable and replicable. The broader implications became apparent for both sides. Admiralty internal memoranda from May 5th indicated confidence that Allied escort groups could now contain, disrupt, and eliminate Wolfpack formations before they could threaten the main convoy body. German U-boat losses were accelerating. May 1943 would ultimately see 41 submarines sunk, a record high. The initiative had decisively shifted, as hunter-killer groups now dictated engagement distance, depth, and timing. BDU recognized that previous strategies, which relied on attrition and stealth, were increasingly unsustainable. Allied Doctrine leveraged technology, intelligence, and aggressive tactics, creating systemic advantage. The psychological edge on the Atlantic shifted. Additional evidence illustrated operational integration. Radar-equipped Avenger aircraft from escort carriers scanned 40-kilometer sectors, relaying real-time data to multiple destroyers and corvettes, enabling synchronized Hedgehog volleys. U.S. Navy Black Pit coverage charts documented the reduction of U-boat safe zones from 400 to less than 70 nautical miles. Captain Walker's escort group had perfected staggered depth charge barrages and rapid Hedgehog targeting, increasing overall kill probability from 7% to 25% per engagement. The technical advantage forced U-boat commanders to submerge for longer periods, limiting speed to 5 knots and reducing torpedo reload efficiency. Even BDU communications, previously secure, faced disruption from radio direction-finding units, creating operational friction. Allied integration became a force multiplier. The human consequences were immediate and severe. U-boat crews endured prolonged submersion in Type 7 and Nike's vessels, confined to 7 meters of steel, while machinery overheated and oxygen levels fell, increasing stress and fatigue. Casualties rose not only from destruction but from operational strain, with incidents of men collapsing in control rooms or failing to operate torpedo tubes efficiently. Escort crews faced intense concentration, maintaining sonar sweeps for hours in stormy seas, adjusting depth charges and Hedgehogs under constant threat of counterattack. Captain Walker's logs describe the tension, every echo a potential threat, every silence a danger. Morale now hinged on skillful execution of detection and attack. Survival became a matter of precision, timing, and coordination. By mid-May 1943, the hunter-killer doctrine had proven decisive, shifting the strategic balance of the Atlantic. Escorts no longer waited defensively, but dictated the pace and terms of engagement, forcing U-boats into a reactive posture. Germany's previously invisible predators now faced a networked, technologically superior adversary. The question emerged, could BDU adapt, or was the Atlantic forever changed? The lessons of these engagements set the stage for Black May's unprecedented U-boat losses. Convoy survival would increasingly depend on this synthesis of intelligence, technology, and aggressive tactics. The hunters had become the hunted. April 21, 1943, Liverpool docks, 42 merchant ships, loaded with food, ammunition, and fuel creaked under mooring lines as officers barked last-minute orders and stokers checked boilers on the steamers. Radio silence was ordered. No unnecessary transmissions would betray the convoy's position to the North Atlantic Wolfpacks. Convoy ONS-5, commanded by Commodore John Campbell, began its slow crawl westward at 7 knots, escorted by the 36th Escort Group under Captain Johnny Walker. Sailors noted the ocean's grey horizon stretching endlessly, the air thick with anticipation, and the scent of coal and diesel. On board, cargo manifests meticulously logged over 100,000 tons of critical supplies, essential for sustaining Britain's war effort. Radar sweeps from corvettes and destroyers scanned the horizon, while sonar operators trained ears to the low hum of distant U-boats. This was no ordinary convoy. Intelligence reports had warned of 30 German submarines converging in the Atlantic, coordinated under WW orders. The first nightfall brought an uneasy calm, but the tension was palpable across all decks. Technically, the convoy relied on integrated escort tactics, combining sonar, radar, and Hedgehog anti-submarine mortars. Type 144 ASDAC units on HMS Duncan and other destroyers measured depths up to 300 meters, allowing precise targeting of submerged U-boats. Radar-equipped corvettes detected surface submarines beyond visual range, a critical advantage over the Wolfpack's night surface attacks. Hedgehog mortars, 24 barrels per launcher, fired forward with a contact-fused probability of 1 in 4 for a kill, while traditional depth charges carried only a 7% likelihood per salvo. Convoy escorts formed overlapping arcs of detection, creating kill zones and forcing U-boats to dive for extended periods, slowing speed to less than 5 knots. Communications within the 36th Escort Group were encrypted, preventing interception by WW and reducing the effectiveness of coordinated attacks. The practical outcome was a defensive network capable of transitioning instantly to offensive strikes. Technology and training now combined to dictate the flow of engagement. Comparison between Allied and German tactics highlighted the turning tide. U-boats, previously dominant through stealth, speed, and radio-coordinated Wolfpacks, now faced constant aerial and surface detection. WW relied on the assumption that convoys could be overwhelmed by numbers and surprise, while the Allies deployed layered defenses and aggressive countermeasures. Radar and air support effectively reduced the Black Pit from a 400 nautical mile safe zone to less than 70 nautical miles, forcing U-boats to operate in a narrower, riskier space. Wolfpack formations Raubgraf, Stürmer, and Drenger attempted synchronized attacks, but sonar pings, radar sweeps, and Hedgehog barrages disrupted cohesion. Operationally, U-boat commanders had lost initiative. Attacks could no longer be dictated on their terms. The balance of tactical advantage was shifting. Field evidence of this shift came swiftly. By April 25th, 13 ships in ONS-5 had been sunk, totaling approximately 73,000 tons, yet 6 U-boats had been destroyed, a record ratio to that point in the Atlantic campaign. Captain Walker's 36th Escort Group executed coordinated depth charge and Hedgehog patterns, intercepting multiple Wolfpack elements. Aircraft from escort carriers, including Grumman Avengers equipped with ASV Mach 3 radar, strafed surfaced U-boats, limiting torpedo attacks. WW's own messages, intercepted and later cited in Admiralty reports, expressed alarm at the unexpected loss ratio. "We are suffering unprecedented attrition. The convoy's escort tactics are proving effective." This evidence suggested a fundamental breakdown in the previously dominant Wolfpack model. Tactical aggression had now neutralized the element of surprise. The broader implications were unmistakable. For the first time, convoy losses were balanced by U-boat attrition, signaling a potential strategic turning point in the Battle of the Atlantic. May 1943 would soon see Allied escorts further refine hunter-killer techniques. Building on the lessons of ONS-5, BDU recognized that continued reliance on previous methods could no longer guarantee success. Intelligence analyses noted that coordinated attacks without adequate air support were increasingly hazardous. The psychological effect on U-boat crews was immediate. Commanders reported heightened anxiety, reduced morale, and errors under pressure. The long-standing advantage held by Germany's undersea fleet was eroding rapidly. A decisive shift in maritime dominance was underway. Additional supporting evidence came from convoy survivor accounts and official logs. Ships' radio officers detailed frantic SOS signals transmitted when U-boat attacks penetrated escort screens. Captain Walker's log entries emphasized tactical flexibility. Escort formations adjusted every 30 minutes to predicted U-boat movements, deploying Hedgehogs in coordinated sectors. Losses within the convoy, though severe, were mitigated by rapid rescue operations and coordinated defensive maneuvers, preventing further attrition. Admiralty documentation highlighted that ONS-5 marked a measurable first U-boat kills now equaled or exceeded ship sinkings during a large convoy engagement. This shift demonstrated that Allied doctrine, integrating technology, intelligence, and aggressive tactics, had matured to operational dominance. The human consequences of the battle were stark. Merchant sailors endured heavy seas, torpedo explosions, and flaming wreckage while attempting to maintain station in convoy columns. Rescue operations required entering waters still threatened by U-boats, placing escort crews at extreme risk. Captain Walker's destroyer logs recorded multiple close calls where Hedgehog firing patterns narrowly avoided friendly vessels, underscoring the tension and precision demanded. Survivors later described exhaustion, terror, and the surreal sight of burning oil slicks stretching for kilometers. Yet morale remained buoyed by the visible destruction of enemy submarines, reinforcing the psychological impact of active defense. Operational effectiveness now hinged on human vigilance and coordinated execution as much as on technology. By the end of the ONS-5 engagement, the strategic message was clear. BDU's Wolfpack approach could no longer dominate the Atlantic. 13 merchant ships had been lost, but the destruction of 6 U-boats marked a watershed, tipping the attrition scale for the first time. The convoy's survival demonstrated the potential for sustained Allied control when escorts combined aggressive tactics, technological integration, and intelligence support. Admiralty after-action reports highlighted ONS-5 as a template for subsequent operations across May 1943. The engagement signaled that the long months of U-boat dominance were ending, setting the stage for cascading defeats that would culminate in Black May. The tide of the Atlantic had begun to turn decisively. May 5, 1943, mid-Atlantic, the steel hull of U-456 cut silently through 200 meters of dark water, while lookouts scanned for aircraft above. At precisely 0930 hours, a Liberator from 46 Group RAF, serial number AL987, appeared on the horizon, its ASV Make 3 radar humming at a centimetric wavelength of 3 centimeters, sweeping the waves for any trace of a U-boat. The submarine's METOX radar detector registered a faint signal, too late for evasive action. Crewmen scrambled to crash dives, as the aircraft dropped 4 depth charges, with fuse settings calibrated to 70 meters, hitting the pressure hull with explosive precision. Above, a short Sunderland from No. 10 Squadron Coastal Command approached U-440, illuminating the target with a newly deployed Lee light that cut through the night like a spotlight. The Atlantic, once a vast sanctuary, now contracted under constant aerial surveillance. U-boat captains began realizing that the skies were never empty. Every radar sweep, every low-level approach became a potential death sentence. The technical innovations enabling this reach were critical. The ASV Mach 3 centimetric radar, operating at 3 centimeter wavelength, allowed detection of periscopes and surfaced submarines at ranges up to 20 kilometers, a 4-fold improvement over earlier metric radar systems. Liberators and Sunderlands were equipped with a 400 horsepower Bristol Hercules engine, providing a range of over 4,000 kilometers, sufficient to patrol the former air gap previously free of Allied coverage. Lee lights, 25 million candle power searchlights mounted under wing pylons, allowed aircraft to illuminate U-boats at night without prior detection. These systems functioned in tandem: radar detected, aircrew maneuvered, Lee light revealed, and ordnance struck. German countermeasures, including Metox and Naxos radar detectors, proved increasingly inadequate, often alerting crews too late or being jammed by Allied radar pulses. Coastal Command reports documented sighting rates rising by over 60% compared to March 1943. Operationally, U-boats could no longer surface safely to recharge batteries or transmit radio messages. Comparison between Allied and German approaches emphasized the growing asymmetry. U-boats relied on stealth, limited visual detection, and nocturnal surface running, previously sufficient to traverse the mid-Atlantic undetected. Allied aircraft combined centimetric radar, long-range patrol endurance, and high-power illumination, transforming the air gap from a 400 nautical mile sanctuary into a monitored corridor under continuous threat. Losses for U-boats spiked in the first 3 weeks of May 1943 alone. 48 submarines were sunk versus only 25 merchant vessels lost in the same period, according to BDU situational reports. Allies now dictated the operational tempo. Wolfpack coordination, dependent on radio signals and surface movements, became increasingly hazardous. Tactics that once ensured surprise now resulted in catastrophic vulnerability. Field evidence confirmed the lethal effectiveness of air power. RAF Liberator L-987's engagement with U-456 resulted in the complete destruction of the Type 7C submarine, recorded in Coastal Command Action Report 1294. Similarly, Short Sunderland W4039 sank U-440 northeast of the Azores, marking the first confirmed U-boat loss under the Lee light at night. Air crews documented periscope sightings at ranges of up to 17 kilometers, deploying depth charges with fuse settings between 60 and 80 meters. Survivors noted that evasive maneuvers were largely ineffective. The combination of radar detection and immediate attack compressed reaction windows to under 30 seconds. Operationally, U-boat patrol patterns and attack strategies were forced to change, often delaying Wolfpack convergence and reducing torpedo effectiveness. The broader strategic implications became clear. The Atlantic was no longer a vast, uncontested theater for Germany's U-boats. Air power now imposed a ceiling over operational freedom, forcing BDU to revise patrol doctrines and limit surface exposure. Supply lines could now rely on increased convoy protection without fearing undetected submarine attacks in the mid-ocean gap. Allied intelligence noted that unrestricted submarine warfare had met its first sustainable countermeasure. Losses were no longer solely a product of convoy defense, but of constant aerial threat, imposing fatigue and caution on every U-boat crew. The psychological effect was profound, with commanders reporting increased stress and reduced confidence in radio coordination. The balance of control had definitively shifted. Additional supporting evidence arrived from operational records of 46 Group RAF and Phnom Penh 10 Squadron Coastal Command. Aircraft flying long-range patrols logged over 120 sightings between May 1st and May 25th, with 20 confirmed sinkings. METOX-equipped U-boats often failed to avoid detection, as centimetric radar surpassed the designed frequency response of their early warning systems. The integration of air reconnaissance with surface escorts created overlapping kill zones, a layered defense previously impossible. Admiralty analysis cited in Coastal Command Report AC 194307 concluded that the Atlantic could now be considered effectively closed to uncontrolled U-boat movement. The strategic landscape had shifted in favor of the Allies, with technology and tactics rendering previously safe waters deadly. The human consequences for German crews were severe. Submariners faced unending vigilance, exhausting battery limitations, while remaining submerged for 24 to 36 hours at a time. Surface operations required extreme caution. Any misstep could attract a Liberator or Sunderland within minutes. U-boat logs recorded multiple instances of near misses, where depth charges exploded within 20 meters of the hull, causing concussive injuries and psychological strain. The loss of comrades and equipment eroded morale. Decisions made under duress had direct survival consequences, forcing captains to prioritize stealth over offensive initiative. Survivors later recalled the constant dread of approaching aircraft, the eerie beams of lee lights cutting through black waters, and the growing awareness that the Atlantic itself had become hostile territory. By late May 1943, the operational reality was undeniable. The mid-Atlantic gap was no longer a sanctuary for U-boats. The destruction of U-456 and U-440, among others, demonstrated that air power could effectively project force across previously unreachable areas. The combination of centimetric radar, long-range aircraft, and lee light illumination had neutralized Germany's tactical advantage in the open ocean. German countermeasures, including METOX and Naxos, had failed to restore the previous operational envelope. BDU communications reflected mounting concern, emphasizing the need for new tactics and technology. The Atlantic, once seemingly infinite, had been compressed into a controlled, surveilled domain. German desperation would now drive innovation, but the balance had decisively shifted toward the Allies. The stage was set for the technological and tactical confrontations that would define the closing months of the Battle of the Atlantic. May 24, 1943, Carnival Headquarters, Wilhelmshaven, Germany. Admiral Karl Dönitz sat at his mahogany desk, hands gripping a pile of freshly delivered BDU reports, each stamped with the day's date and marked unprecedented losses. The North Atlantic had become a graveyard. The figures were stark: 118 U-boats, lost in the first 5 months of 1943 alone, compared to 73 commissioned in the same period. On the wall hung a chart tracking tonnage, sunk versus operational U-boats, a jagged red line plunging beneath projections for the year. A telegram from BDU headquarters in Lorient detailed the fate of U-569, U-591, and U-658, noting all hands lost. The situation demanded immediate re-evaluation. Dönitz rose and walked to a map of convoy routes, tracing with his finger the areas now dominated by Allied aircraft. Each red X on the map represented a former advantage turned lethal threat. Technical analysis underscored the crisis. Allied long-range aircraft, including 46 Group RAF Liberators and No. 10 Squadron Sunderlands, patrolled previously safe mid-Atlantic zones with centimetric ASV Mk3 radar, detecting U-boats at ranges exceeding 20 kilometers. Hedgehog and depth charge tactics by hunter-killer groups, coordinated from escort carriers such as USS Bogue, had increased U-boat destruction probability from 7% per encounter in 1941 to over 25% by May 1943. German Metox radar detectors, designed to alert crews to Allied radar, often failed against the centimetric wavelength, leaving U-boats vulnerable. Production rates of new Type 7C and Nyack-C submarines, documented in Kriegsmarine Fact Sheet 114, could not keep pace with losses, with only 36 U-boats entering service in April compared to 28 sunk. Operationally, Dönitz recognized that attrition was outpacing reinforcement. Comparison with earlier BDU optimism revealed the magnitude of the shift. In January 1941, BDU diaries expressed confidence in Wolfpack tactics, citing over 100,000 tons sunk per convoy encounter and minimal losses. By contrast, the May 1943 entries noted daily losses averaging 2 U-boats, with tonnage sunk falling below projections. Allied integration of air coverage, cryptanalysis through U-Ultra intelligence, and aggressive escort doctrines had fundamentally altered the operational landscape. Wolfpacks, once capable of overwhelming convoys, were now detected before coordinated strikes, resulting in failed attacks or catastrophic counterattacks. The balance of initiative had moved decisively. Dönitz understood that traditional tactics were obsolete. Field evidence intensified the sense of crisis. Reports from U-604, U-231, and U-456 indicated crew casualties exceeding 50% during single convoy engagements. Depth charges, detonated within 20 meters, caused structural hull deformation, documented in BDU Damage Assessment Report 237. Survivors described the relentless pressure of sonar-guided attacks, combined with constant air patrols, reducing effective patrol time and forcing evasive maneuvers that slowed operational tempo. Tactical doctrine notes emphasized avoidance over engagement, a stark reversal from the aggressive orders issued in 1941. Losses to convoys ONS-5 and HX-229 were emblematic, with the Allies sinking 6 U-boats while losing only 13 merchant ships, marking the first sustained period where the initiative shifted. The broader implications became apparent to Dönitz as he reviewed his command logs. Even with the introduction of new Type 641 models, increased fuel capacity, and Schnorchel technology under experimental testing, the gap between losses and operational replacement threatened the strategic sustainability of the U-boat fleet. The psychological impact on crews, compounded by reports of captured submariners under interrogation, undermined morale. Tactical innovation alone could not reverse the pattern without production matching attrition. Dönitz contemplated withdrawing U-boats from mid-Atlantic operations, a measure he would implement later that day, officially ordering all submarines back to bases in France and Norway. The decision signaled the end of the unrestricted North Atlantic offensive, a doctrinal rupture in Kriegsmarine strategy. Supporting evidence arrived from family visits and internal diaries. Dönitz personally visited the families of fallen captains, including Korvettenkapitän Heinrich Lehmann-Willenbrock's widow and the parents of Kapitän Leutnant Horst Uphoff. Letters from his son Peter Dönitz, lost at sea aboard U-954 in 1944, lay open on his desk, a grim reminder of personal stakes intertwined with command responsibilities. BDU entries noted the dissonance between professional duty and human cost, recording phrases such as unbearable losses and morale strained to breaking point. These human dimensions underscored the operational crisis. Each sunk submarine represented not just material loss, but a rupture in the experienced cadre essential for effective Wolfpack coordination. Operational consequences were immediate and severe. Wolfpack formations were suspended pending re-evaluation, patrol routes were shortened, and contact with Allied convoys was restricted to high-value targets only. Production bottlenecks meant only 36 new U-boats could replace the 118 lost, a deficit that could not be bridged in months. Training programs, reduced to accelerate deployment, produced crews lacking the experience necessary for complex coordinated attacks. BDU reported that Germany now faced a window of vulnerability, during which the Allies could further consolidate convoy defenses and air patrol integration. The tide once favorable to Dönitz's offensive strategy now threatened irreversible attrition. By the evening of May 24, 1943, Carnival HQ was steeped in an uneasy quiet. Dönitz had ordered the temporary withdrawal of all North Atlantic U-boats, a measure reflecting both desperation and strategic recalibration. The operational analysis, combined with field losses, production constraints, and technological inferiority in air detection, illustrated that the previous initiative enjoyed in 1941 was irretrievably lost. Germany faced the imperative of new tactics and innovations, including Schnorchels, acoustic torpedoes, and eventually Type XXIl's designs. Yet these would require time to develop and deploy. BDU diary entries concluded the day with sober acknowledgement. Losses unprecedented. The Atlantic is contested beyond expectation. The stage was set for German desperation measures, the next chapter in the Atlantic War, where innovation would be driven not by advantage, but by survival. June 3, 1943. Naval Dockyard, Den Helder, Netherlands. Engineers and submarine crews gathered around U-573, a Type 7C, under retrofitting, as a freshly installed Schnorchel mast rose slowly above the waterline. Diesel engines hummed beneath the hull, running submerged while air intake tubes extended precisely 1.5 meters above the surface. Crews recorded vibration frequencies, exhaust gas dispersion, and fuel consumption, comparing notes against Kriegsmarine R and D memos detailing theoretical endurance. Observers from the Naval Testing Board measured air quality inside the conning tower every 5 minutes, noting carbon monoxide levels not exceeding 70 parts per million, a tolerable limit for prolonged underwater operation. For the first time, the submarine could recharge batteries and ventilate internal compartments without surfacing, potentially avoiding Allied radar detection. Technical assessment revealed both promise and limitation. The Schnorchel permitted continuous diesel operation at up to 12 knots while submerged, but wave-induced mast movement occasionally triggered automatic engine shutdowns. Hull-mounted pressure sensors recorded deviations of up to 20 centimeters under storm conditions, forcing crews to manually override safety locks. Type XXIl electro-boot designs promised a radical improvement, capable of 17 knots submerged, with streamlined hulls reducing hydrodynamic drag by 15% compared to Type 7C. German electronics, including the Naxos radar detector, could theoretically identify Allied centimetric radar emissions at ranges exceeding 15 kilometers, but field tests revealed intermittent false positives in rough seas. Engineers compiled comprehensive performance logs, weighing prototype success against operational uncertainty. Comparison with Allied technology highlighted the gap. Escort carriers and long-range aircraft had already fielded centimetric radar, lee light illumination, and homing torpedoes, giving the Allies immediate operational advantage. While U-boats waited for months of development and trials, British and American crews refined tactics, integrating radar sweeps with coordinated depth charge and hedgehog attacks, achieving detection rates in the mid-Atlantic of 67% over patrol areas. German prototypes, still untested under combat stress, could not match real-world operational reliability. Dönitz recognized that even the promise of the Schnorchel and Type XX-1 would arrive too late to reverse the strategic shift in the Atlantic. Test results were mixed, yet revealing. During submerged trials, U-254 experienced diesel intake disruption after 27 minutes at 5 knots in moderate swell conditions. Air pressure sensors inside the Schnorchel recorded surges of up to 50 pascals, requiring emergency valve adjustments. Electromechanical systems in Type XXL mock-ups failed intermittently under torque loads exceeding 800 Newton-meters. Despite these setbacks, battery endurance increased by 32%, and submerged range expanded from 120 nautical miles at 4 knots to 250. Engineers documented every anomaly, producing 8 detailed R&D reports, each exceeding 25 pages, noting human factors alongside mechanical performance. Broader implications were clear. Even a successful Schnorchel could not fully restore the initiative. Allied air coverage, convoy coordination, and ultra-intelligence had already forced U-boat Doctrine into retreat. Production constraints meant fewer than 20 Schnorchel-equipped Type 7C submarines would be operational by September 1943. Type XXL units, intended for mass deployment, faced material shortages and delayed assembly, with the first operational boat not ready until late 1944. The strategic window for technological recovery had narrowed to a few months, underscoring that innovation alone could not offset accumulated attrition. Additional evidence emerged from Kriegsmarine memos and field reports. RA&D document KMD 1934 noted repeated crew frustration at waiting for unproven equipment, recording instances where patrols were cancelled pending Schnorchel availability. Letters from Kapitänleutnant Werner Hartenstein described mechanical uncertainty, stating, "We know the theory, yet the sea will judge the device." Allied intelligence intercepts, cited in Ultra Digest Report Number Core 114, indicated awareness of German experiments, but no immediate operational threat. Comparison of fielded versus prototype technology starkly illustrated the gap. While Allied convoys now enjoyed near-constant air cover, U-boat crews were experimenting with untested mechanical innovations. Human and operational consequences were immediate. Crews assigned to Schnorchel-equipped boats experienced heightened stress during trials, balancing engine operation, valve management, and sonar navigation in cramped quarters. Training programs expanded by 15% to accommodate new procedures, but operational readiness dropped as crews rotated through multiple prototype vessels. The psychological toll of waiting for promised technology, coupled with mounting Allied effectiveness, eroded confidence in leadership. Submarine officers debated whether continued testing delayed critical patrols, potentially costing both tonnage and morale in the escalating Atlantic campaign. By mid-June 1943, the promise of the Schnorchel and Type XX-1 designs offered a glimmer of hope, yet reality remained sobering. Germany faced an Atlantic increasingly dominated by Allied air power, hunter-killer groups, and real-time intelligence. Operational gaps could not be closed by prototypes alone, as documented in BDU status reports and R&D assessments. Dönitz and his engineers confronted a stark truth. Innovation was arriving too late, production too slow, and the human cost too high. The stage was set for continued attrition, with only partial technological remedies in hand. The war in the Atlantic had entered a new phase, where survival depended less on doctrine and more on the endurance of men and machinery alike, setting the scene for the relentless attrition of late 1943. May 5, 1943, Blohm and Voss Shipyard, Hamburg, Germany. The slipways groaned under the weight of U-576, a Type 7C, as riveters and welders raced to launch her into the Elbe before high tide. Shipyard logs recorded a launch interval of one vessel every 26 hours, sustaining a production rate of 26 U-boats per month in the first half of 1943. Crane operators measured hull displacement at 700 tons, while electricians verified battery compartment wiring capable of handling 1200 amperes without shorting. BDU dispatches from Wilhelmshaven indicated that despite these outputs, personnel shortages remained critical, as new commanders reported fewer than 3 patrols on average before assuming full command. Launching steel hulls was easier than training men. Technical examinations revealed the depth of the manpower crisis. Training schools in Flensburg were handling double the projected intake, with simulators designed for 90 cadets running at 180% capacity. Torpedo trial ranges recorded that inexperienced crews misfired up to 15% of their G7E electric torpedoes under realistic sea conditions, often due to misjudged gyro settings. Instruction manuals prescribed 6-week courses for target tracking and evasive maneuvers, but actual completion averaged 3 weeks. BDU records highlighted that attrition rates remained severe. 75% of all U-boat men assigned in the first 5 months of 1943 would never return from patrol. Technical skill alone could not bridge the gap. Comparison with Allied training pipelines emphasized Germany's disadvantage. British and American submariners received 24 weeks of phased instruction, including classroom simulation, torpedo drills, and coordinated attacks with surface and air units. German recruits often saw just 1 or 2 convoy operations before facing full-scale Wolfpack encounters. Allied intelligence and ultra-intercepts compounded the problem, as U-boat crews confronted foreknowledge of convoy positions and carrier-based aircraft patrols. Germany could produce steel and motors, yet Allied human capital, rigorously trained, ensured that new submarines faced crews whose survival instincts were sharper and reactions faster. Production numbers alone offered a false sense of security. Field evidence confirmed the consequences. During a May 1943 patrol, U-603, under a commander with 2 prior missions, miscalculated periscope depth in rough seas, resulting in hull breach and flooding in the forward torpedo room. U-632, under a similar inexperienced officer, fired 2 torpedoes at convoy HX-237, missing entirely and alerting escorts. Post-war BDU analysis cited 20 documented incidents in that month alone, where inexperienced crews failed standard maneuvers or misinterpreted sonar readings. Simulators helped reduce errors marginally, but only practical experience could prepare officers for the chaos of hunter-killer groups and air-covered convoys. Broader implications became unmistakable. The Kriegsmarine could sustain high U-boat production, but trained personnel lagged behind exponentially. By the end of May 1943, 60% of new commanders had fewer than 3 operational patrols, creating a cohort vulnerable to Allied air power and hunter-killer tactics. Losses were no longer merely statistical. They represented a collapse of operational competence, undermining Wolfpack doctrine itself. Shipyards became factories of steel, while the sea became a crucible where inexperienced crews perished. The human bottleneck threatened to nullify the technological promise of Schnorchel-equipped Type 7 and forthcoming Type XX1 Electroboot. Additional evidence surfaced from BDU staff assessments. Internal memos documented the psychological strain on training officers, noting attrition among instructors at 32% due to extended hours and moral stress. Reports highlighted that torpedo performance varied by 10% depending on operator skill, making inexperienced crews statistically less lethal than seasoned adversaries. Comparisons with Allied reports emphasized this deficiency. British Royal Navy evaluation showed sub-crews achieving an 85% hit probability during trials, nearly triple the German rate under similar sea conditions. Documentation, including BDU diary entry number 116, described repeated counseling sessions for junior officers before patrols, underscoring the growing gap between equipment and human proficiency. Human and operational consequences were immediate and stark. Crews faced constant exposure to enemy detection, fatigue from rapid training cycles, and a psychological burden exacerbated by the knowledge that 75% of comrades would not survive. Commanders struggled to make tactical decisions under pressure, often deferring to senior enlisted officers who themselves had minimal experience. Crew rotation schedules increased errors, while morale in Flensburg training facilities declined precipitously. Every new U-boat represented both a triumph of German industry and a potential casualty in an increasingly lethal Atlantic. The tension between steel output and human readiness became unbearable. By the end of May 1943, the Kriegsmarine confronted a bitter paradox. The cost of steel had been paid in blood, and production numbers no longer guaranteed operational success. The U-boat arm, while technologically improving with Schnorchel trials and Type XX1 designs, remained constrained by inexperienced crews facing overwhelming Allied air power and hunter-killer groups. BDU reports warned that the current generation of submariners was a doomed cohort, likely unable to reverse strategic losses despite ongoing industrial output. The human toll, now intertwined with technological ambition, set the stage for further attrition and morale collapse, forcing the German command to confront that the war at sea would be decided as much by trained men as by steel hulls. Spring 1st, 1943, North Atlantic, aboard U-603, Type 7C. The diesel engines throbbed beneath the steel hull, vibrating every bulkhead and sending the smell of fuel oil mingling with the tang of human sweat through the narrow passageways. 47 men crammed into 57 meters of steel, each bunk stacked 3 high, barely allowing enough space to turn. Torpedo tubes, 14 in total, loomed like silent sentinels, loaded and ready, their compressed air valves occasionally hissing in the background. Depth gauges rattled under the minor tremors of the ocean, foreshadowing the larger shocks that would come from British depth charges. Herbert Werner's memoir, Iron Coffins, described the claustrophobia as a living tomb that smelled of diesel, damp wool, and stale bread. Even the storage of provisions reflected the pressure: 2-week-old potatoes already sprouting mold, and bread hardened under humid conditions. The patrol, slated for 50 to 70 days, had barely begun, and yet the anxiety of confinement pressed on every chest. The technical realities became clear quickly for new recruits. Air purification relied on chemical canisters capable of filtering carbon monoxide and oxygen depletion for up to 24 hours at a time, but these were prone to failure in high humidity. Periscopes extended through mere centimeters of steel to observe convoys, while the boat remained submerged to 30 meters, a standard depth in spring Atlantic patrols. Torpedo targeting required careful calculation of speed, distance and gyro angles, often under intermittent power due to fluctuating battery amperage, which could reach 1200 amperes in discharge peaks. Even minor errors in angle computation could result in misses or accidental detection. Compared with earlier war years, when U-boat crews operated with confidence under minimal threat, the spring of 1943 presented a scenario in which every technical failure amplified stress. Each system's failure had immediate operational consequences, demanding constant vigilance. Comparison with early war patrols highlighted the psychological shift. In 1941, U-99 under Otto Kretschmer achieved high success rates with young crews, yet confidence stemmed from Allied inexperience and minimal air coverage. By 1943, hunter-killer groups and long-range RAF liberators patrolled the Atlantic, shrinking the air gap to near zero. The U-boat's diesel-electric systems, though technically advanced, could no longer guarantee safety, as the crew faced constant risk of aerial detection and coordinated depth-charge attacks. Allied sonar and radar integration outpaced German countermeasures, including Metox and Naxos detectors. Operational doctrine that once allowed bold surface maneuvers became increasingly dangerous. Confidence had given way to vigilance, turning technical proficiency into survival skill. Field experiences confirmed the tension. U-603 endured a sudden attack from an RAF Liberator, its lee light illuminating the hull and sending depth gauges quivering. Bolts rattled loose in the pressure hull, pipes leaked hydraulic fluid, and the electric motors briefly overloaded under emergency submersion. The crew of 47 responded with trained efficiency, yet the panic of first-time recruits was palpable, causing minor injuries and frayed nerves. Torpedo tubes had to be recalibrated mid-attack, delaying counterfire. Werner's diary entry from the same period noted that even seasoned stokers felt the hull shiver like a beast under the hammer of unseen fists. Each encounter tested both the boat's mechanical limits and the men's psychological endurance. Broader implications became unmistakable as patrols lengthened. 50 to 70 days at sea meant rationed food, limited fresh water, and constant vigilance under tight quarters. Sleep came in 2-hour increments, if at all, with bunks doubling as storage for charts, batteries, and personal effects. Moldy bread and sprouting potatoes eroded morale, while the continuous diesel odor intensified headaches and fatigue. The combination of confined space, sensory deprivation, and persistent threat began to erode cohesion among crews, particularly those with fewer than 3 prior patrols. By mid-patrol, green officers displayed indecision, often deferring critical tactical choices to petty officers or veteran stokers. Even the most capable recruits faced a psychological attrition rate unseen in surface naval units. Additional evidence from post-war BDU records and survivor memoirs underscores this human strain. U-603's log recorded 5 instances of temporary crew incapacitation due to carbon monoxide alarms triggered by faulty purifiers. Observations of other Type 7Cs showed similar vulnerabilities. Confined ventilation systems allowed airborne pathogens to circulate, producing minor illness in over 20% of crews per patrol. Werner's iron coffins detailed the cumulative effect of repeated depth charge barrages on morale, noting that older submariners often became silent, withdrawn, and hypervigilant. Allied documentation from Convoy HX-237 corroborates these encounters, indicating U-boat evasive maneuvers often reflected nervous overreaction rather than tactical necessity. Human endurance had become as critical as steel integrity. Human and operational consequences were stark. Crews operated under near-constant stress, where panic, miscommunication, or technical failure could result in catastrophic hull breach or loss of life. Training gaps from Flensburg, as discussed in Chapter 11, magnified errors, leaving inexperienced men unable to react instinctively under pressure. Even minor injuries could complicate operations, reducing torpedo reload efficiency and sensor maintenance. Crew rotations, combined with patrol lengths, created cumulative fatigue, making each depth charge or sonar ping more psychologically disruptive. The human cost of industrially advanced U-boats was immediate. Ships remained floating coffins for the inexperienced and overstretched. By the conclusion of the first month aboard U-603, it was clear that life inside the pressure hull was a crucible testing endurance, skill, and courage simultaneously. The combination of cramped quarters, sensory deprivation, moldy provisions, and relentless threats from aircraft and hunter-killer groups eroded morale before any strategic defeat was imposed externally. The young recruit, eyes wide with anxiety, realized that survival depended as much on mental fortitude as on the technical performance of diesel engines, torpedoes, and hull integrity. These conditions foreshadowed the broader collapse of U-boat effectiveness, setting the stage for strategic withdrawals and morale crises that would define the mid-Atlantic theater in the months to come. The Atlantic had become both a battlefield and a test of human limits. Mid-May 1943, Admiralty War Room, Whitehall, London. Map boards stretched across polished oak tables, each marked with coloured pins showing convoy positions and U-boat sightings. Staff officers huddled around CVE reports and Western Approaches command signals, noting the sudden drop in merchant ship sinkings compared to March, when 32 Allied freighters had been lost in a single week. Liberty ships arrived with surprising regularity. One new vessel launched every 3 days from the Fall River and Kaiser shipyards in Massachusetts, each carrying 10,000 tons of cargo. Senior Admiralty officers traced routes of 6 convoys, ONS 5, HX-237, South Carolina 129, highlighting minimal losses and reporting that 12 U-boats were destroyed, while only 4 freighters had been sunk. Charts showed the combined coverage of 46 escort carriers and hundreds of corvettes, frigates, and destroyers, now overlapping every known U-boat transit corridor. Intelligence from decrypted Enigma messages confirmed the scale of German disarray. The air of cautious triumph was palpable. Technical analysis of escort capacity revealed critical advantages. CVE-class escort carriers, displacing 14,000 tons and armed with 24 aircraft, allowed for continuous air patrols along the mid-Atlantic gap, previously thought unreachable by long-range aircraft. Radar-equipped Sunderland flying boats and Liberators provided centimetric ASV Mach 3 detection, capable of spotting surfaced U-boats at distances up to 15 kilometers. Depth charge loads and Hedgehog mortar systems gave escorts the ability to attack with precision, while sonar arrays tracked submerged submarines at ranges up to 3 kilometers. Coastal command signals showed sighting reports had increased by 72% compared to April, providing real-time targeting data for convoys. The integration of intelligence and tactical innovation meant German Wolfpack strategies were increasingly obsolete. Each technical upgrade directly translated into higher survivability for merchant vessels. Comparison between Allied and German capabilities highlighted a strategic imbalance. In March, U-boats sank 25 freighters in a single week, achieving operational superiority through concentrated Wolfpack attacks and exploiting the air gap in the mid-Atlantic. By May, U-boat losses outpaced merchant sinkings for the first time, 13 submarines destroyed against 6 freighters lost, according to Western Approach's command logs. German countermeasures, including Hedgehogs and Naxos radar detectors, could no longer mitigate constant air patrols and convoy escorts. Allied shipbuilding outpaced German replacement rates, while Hamburg and Kiel launched 26 U-boats per month. The attrition of trained crews meant operational deployment lagged dangerously. The operational initiative had decisively shifted. Field reports confirmed the scale of the shift. Convoy HX 238, comprising 38 merchant ships, escorted by Escort Group 36 under Captain Frederick John Walker, reached Liverpool with only 2 minor torpedo hits, both failing to detonate. Escorts detected U-boat contacts 32 kilometers in advance, forcing submarines to submerge prematurely, reducing speed from 17 knots on the surface to 7 knots underwater. Depth charges dropped by corvettes caused structural damage in 3 Type 7Cs, later confirmed in BDU loss reports. The cumulative effect of combined air-sea operations demonstrated that Wolfpack tactics were now vulnerable to coordinated detection and counterattack. Each patrol revealed German crews struggling to adapt to Allied numerical and technological superiority. Broader implications became evident across the Atlantic theater. Merchant sinkings consistently fell below the replacement rate of Liberty and Victory ships, creating a strategic supply surplus. The ability to maintain uninterrupted convoy operations allowed the build-up of forces for Operation Husky and the forthcoming invasion of Sicily. Encrypted intercepts indicated that BDU faced unmanageable losses in both ships and trained personnel, with replacement rates insufficient to recover from May's attrition. German confidence, previously buoyed by early successes in 1941 and 42, collapsed under the dual pressure of material shortage and operational intelligence. Allied dominance threatened to render the U-boat arm strategically irrelevant. Additional supporting evidence reinforced the turning point. Reports from Western Approach's command indicated that radar-equipped aircraft and escort carriers were now present across 92% of all transatlantic shipping routes. Admiralty memos, including document ADM 1994-43, detailed the accelerated production of corvettes and destroyers, with displacement tonnages increasing by 12% over the previous quarter. Allied integration of intelligence, air, and naval assets contrasted sharply with German reactive strategies, which relied on pre-positioned U-boat patrol lines and obsolete detection technologies. The technological and numerical superiority of Allied forces became self-reinforcing, allowing for operational initiative at a scale Germany could no longer contest effectively. Operational consequences were stark and immediate. German U-boats faced a near-impossible calculus: engage heavily escorted convoys at extreme risk or remain submerged and ineffective. Crew morale, already strained by loss rates exceeding 75% for first-time patrols, deteriorated further. BDU command reports noted that some captains refused patrol orders, while others deployed cautiously, significantly reducing the effectiveness of Wolfpack tactics. The strategic initiative had shifted irreversibly to the Allies, marking a critical psychological and operational milestone in the Battle of the Atlantic. By late May 1943, the Admiralty recognized a historic shift. The Atlantic, once a theater dominated by German U-boats, had become a corridor under Allied control, patrolled continuously by aircraft and escorted by fast-moving CVEs and destroyers. Supply lines from North America flowed with unprecedented security, while BDU grappled with irrecoverable losses in trained crews and vessels. Signals intelligence, escort numbers, and operational coordination collectively tipped the balance. This convergence of technology, production, and strategy set the stage for the climactic withdrawals of U-boat forces in June, foreshadowing the decisive turn of the Atlantic War. Germany's capacity to challenge these gains was rapidly diminishing. May 24, 1943, BDU headquarters, Kerneval, near Wilhelmshaven. Admiral Karl Dönitz sat at the oak desk, cluttered with BDU operational logs, Kriegsmarine teleprinter reports, and personnel files, tapping out a radio order to all U-boats: withdraw from North Atlantic patrols and regroup at mid-Atlantic bases. 41 submarines had been sunk in May alone, with Type 7Cs and INCs lost in waves of air and sea attacks. The message, terse and unyielding, stated, "Losses now intolerable," echoing across the Atlantic to stunned crews on surfacing decks. Diaries from Lorient and St. Nazaire noted the quiet disbelief. Captains, some with only 2 patrols, stared at the radio in shock, realizing that the once dominant Wolfpack now faced open seas patrolled relentlessly by Allied aircraft and escort groups. Convoy routes previously perilous were suddenly traversable with minimal risk. The Atlantic itself seemed to have shifted allegiance. Technical analysis of the retreat revealed the operational constraints that forced Dönitz's hand. Continuous air coverage by Liberators, Sunderlands, and newly deployed escort carriers created overlapping radar nets using centimetric ASV Mark III systems capable of detecting U-boats from 15 kilometers away. Depth charges and Hedgehog mortars, combined with fast sonar-tracked attacks by corvettes, inflicted catastrophic losses on submerged vessels. Allied intelligence, fed by decrypted Enigma traffic, allowed convoys to reroute dynamically, further reducing U-boat effectiveness. While German R&D had introduced the Schnorchel to allow diesel running while submerged, deployment was slow, and Type XX01 electroboots remained on paper, incapable of influencing the immediate tactical picture. Operationally, BDU could not risk U-boat survival without technology still months away from field deployment. The retreat was a tactical necessity dictated by technical inferiority. Comparisons with early war conditions emphasized the dramatic reversal. In March 1941, Wolfpacks of 20 or more Type 7Cs could intercept convoys across the mid-Atlantic with near impunity, sinking 25 freighters in a single week. By May 1943, Allied convoy losses were minimal, averaging fewer than 6 ships per week, despite larger tonnage and numbers. German radar detectors, including Metox and Naxos, failed to provide meaningful protection against long-range air patrols. Liberty ships, one launched every 3 days, replaced merchant losses faster than U-boat strikes could destroy them. The strategic initiative had shifted decisively. Where German submarines once dictated the tempo, now retreat defined their operations. Field reports confirmed the scale of the withdrawal. U-123 and U-604, 2 Type 7Cs operating south of Greenland, were forced to submerge repeatedly as Liberator squadrons from 46 Group RAF patrolled relentlessly. Depth charges raked hulls, causing rivets to loosen and control systems to malfunction. Observations from U-boat diaries noted crews clinging to ballast adjustments and hydroplane controls while listening to the echoing concussion of charges above. Convoy ONS-5 transits during the same period arrived in Liverpool with only minor losses escorted by CVE Bow-class carriers and multiple corvettes. Each patrol illustrated that German tactical options had contracted drastically. Aggressive surface attacks were no longer viable. Survivability required caution, not initiative. The broader implications became immediately clear within the Kriegsmarine High Command. Retreat signaled that Germany's U-boat arm could no longer impose a strategic blockade on Britain, undermining the central premise of Dönitz's Atlantic campaign. BDU operational logs, including entries from May 24 through 28, highlighted morale decline and operational hesitation, with some captains delaying departure in anticipation of safer conditions. Allied mastery of convoy routing, air cover, and signals intelligence created a feedback loop, making aggressive U-boat deployment increasingly futile. Strategic initiative had shifted irreversibly to the Allies, threatening the economic and military lifelines that Dönitz had been tasked to sever. Additional supporting evidence reinforced the severity of losses. Diaries from Saint-Nazaire shipyards noted that newly commissioned U-boats remained unmanned for weeks, with experienced crews destroyed in the prior month's engagements. BDU training statistics showed that 60% of commanders had fewer than 3 patrols, leaving vessels operationally competent but tactically inexperienced. Western Approaches report stated bluntly, "The battle is one referencing both minimal convoy losses and unprecedented U-boat attrition." Comparison with early 1942 operations revealed that where German submarines once dominated, now every transit required calculated caution under constant surveillance. The operational risk had become politically and militarily intolerable. Human consequences of the withdrawal were immediate and profound. Submarine crews, conditioned to months at sea with pride in stealth and offensive capability, were forced into a defensive posture, creating tension and confusion aboard vessels. Officers reported quiet despair in logs. The familiar Wolfpack tactics that had inspired confidence now seemed obsolete. Letters from sailors to families describe a sense of impotence, where survival, not victory, became the primary concern. Dönitz himself recorded in his diary the discomfort of issuing a retreat, noting that for the first time the U-boat arm had been strategically checked by Allied superiority in numbers, technology, and intelligence. The psychological toll was as significant as the material losses. By the end of May 1943, the withdrawal marked a historic pivot in the Battle of the Atlantic. Germany's first strategic retreat signaled that the Wolfpack era had entered a defensive phase, with technology and production lagging behind Allied adaptation. Convoys traversed previously contested waters with unprecedented security, and U-boat operational doctrine shifted from attack to survival. Dönitz's orders were clear: regroup, preserve remaining vessels, and await the arrival of new technological advantages, including the Schnorchel and Type XX-1 designs. The stage was set for the next chapter, attempts at resurgence under increasingly constrained circumstances, where ingenuity and desperation would clash with Allied dominance. The Atlantic had for the first time slipped from German hands. July 1, 1943. BDU Command Room, Kerneval, Wilhelmshaven. Type 7C U-boat U-604. Surfaced off the Azores. Captain Oberleutnant Hans-Jürgen Liebscher scanning the horizon through binoculars as deck crews tightened anti-aircraft mounts. Orders had been issued for renewed patrols in the mid-Atlantic, a calculated effort to regain initiative after the strategic withdrawal of May. Dönitz, consulting BDU operational records, knew that Allied convoys still represented vital targets, but intelligence from Western approaches indicated increasingly heavy escort coverage. For the first week of July, Liebscher's patrol encountered near-constant radar sweeps, and repeated engagements forced dives within seconds of contact, leaving torpedo tubes cold. Reports from Flensburg training commands noted that 75% of U-boat officers were still green, inexperienced, and ill-prepared for these escalated threats. The initial optimism of a comeback collided immediately with operational reality. Technical examination revealed the limits of the comeback. Schnorchel devices, designed to allow diesel propulsion while submerged, were delayed by mechanical failures and hull integration issues. Trials on U-459 and U-462 indicated that air intake valves frequently clogged with salt spray, reducing diesel efficiency to 65% of rated output. Type 7Cs, fully submerged, could manage 5 knots continuously, far below the 17-knot sprint speed promised by Type XX1, prototypes still in design stages at Kiel. Naxos radar detectors, intended to warn of Allied centimetric ASV Mk3 radar, often gave false positives under high sea states, leaving crews uncertain. Compared to Allied Liberty ships, escorted by carrier CVEs with continuous radar sweeps, German submarines lacked technological parity. Tactical engagement became increasingly hazardous. Comparisons with Allied operations highlighted the disparity. In March 1943, Wolfpacks intercepted convoys with minimal resistance, sinking 20 to 25 ships per week in the mid-Atlantic. By July, even minor attacks were repelled. Convoys reached Liverpool with negligible losses, escorted by corvettes, destroyers, and CVE aircraft. U-604, attempting to shadow convoy HX-245, was detected and chased off by Swordfish aircraft from HMS Tracker, illustrating how Allied air cover now neutralized submerged threats. Where German submarines previously dictated tempo, Allied systems created a persistent anticipatory defense network. The strategic calculus had shifted irreversibly, leaving U-boats on the defensive. Field evidence reinforced the operational collapse. Between July 1st and September 30, 62 U-boats were lost to air and surface attacks, including U-389 and U-455 in Bay of Biscay patrols. Surface transits became deadly. RAF Coastal Command liberators and bowfighters, armed with depth charges and rockets, patrolled expected submarine routes. Attempts to mount the so-called flak trap defense, fitting extra 20mm guns on the conning tower, failed repeatedly. Crews were exposed and damage was severe. BDU operational logs, including entries from Dönitz on July 23, stressed that losses now outpaced minor tactical successes. Each patrol underscored that Germany's U-boat arm was hemorrhaging men and vessels faster than training and construction could compensate. Broader strategic implications became apparent within high command. Minor tactical victories, such as occasional sinking of lone freighters, did not offset cumulative losses. German naval planners recognized that Allied production of one Liberty ship every 3 days, combined with escort carrier deployment, ensured convoys were no longer vulnerable to concentrated U-boat attacks. BDU memos stressed that even Type 9 boats designed for extended range were increasingly at risk in the mid-Atlantic and Bay of Biscay corridors. Operational initiative rested entirely with the Allies, reducing U-boat activity to intermittent harassment rather than sustained interdiction. Germany's hope for a rapid reversal proved illusory. Additional supporting evidence highlighted technological bottlenecks. Delays in Schnorchel rollout meant fewer than 15 operational boats could continuously run submerged during daylight, while Type XX1 electroboots were still months from sea trials. Comparative analysis with Allied sonar and radar integration showed that U-boat defensive countermeasures lagged by years. Field reports from U-522 indicated that crews, attempting to evade CVE-based air patrols, often exceeded recommended dive depths, risking hull integrity. BDU training records revealed that 70% of patrol officers had fewer than 5 missions, compounding risk under new Allied procedures. Tactical ingenuity could not offset systemic disadvantages. Human consequences were stark. Crews experienced heightened anxiety during each surface transit, sleep deprivation from continuous submerged watches, and fear during every sonar ping. Diaries from U-455 described men gripping handrails as depth charges shook the pressure hull, while junior officers whispered prayers over malfunctioning periscopes. Officers recorded exhaustion and fatalism, noting that survival, not success, defined mission priorities. Letters sent home spoke of growing despair, a contrast to early war pride and confidence. Even successful attacks could not erase the psychological strain imposed by overwhelming enemy air cover and intelligence-informed convoy maneuvers. By the end of September 1943, the illusion of recovery had dissipated. Germany's U-boat arm had attempted tactical resurgence, but each patrol confirmed that Allied dominance in production, intelligence, and technology made strategic reversal impossible. Minor victories, such as isolated sinkings or evasion, provided only fleeting morale boosts. Type XXO promised future capability, but the practical reality remained distant, leaving Wolfpacks struggling to survive rather than to dominate. BDU memos concluded that without significant technological breakthroughs deployed at scale, U-boat operations would continue to incur catastrophic attrition. The stage was set for the next phase, the Type XXO myth confronting operational reality, with desperation and innovation colliding in the war's final submarine campaigns. Autumn 1943. Kriegsmarine Design Office, Kiel, Germany. Engineers unrolled the first full-scale blueprints of the Type XXO Electroboot across steel drafting tables, tracing the streamlined hull lines that promised unprecedented submerged speed. Orders from Dönitz had arrived in June for mass production of 1,500 units, with serial numbers beginning at U-2501, U-2502, and onward. The submarine was designed to achieve 17 knots underwater, almost triple the submerged sprint of the existing Type 7C boats. Its hydrodynamically optimized hull, 4 stern-mounted torpedo tubes, and advanced battery array represented a technological leap meant to reverse the tide of Allied anti-submarine dominance. Engineers documented every clearance weld and electrical conduit with exacting detail, aware that even a single misalignment could compromise operational safety at 70 meters depth. Despite enthusiasm, Allied reconnaissance and bombings loomed over production facilities, threatening the entire program. Technical details underscored both potential and limitation. The Type XXO's main electric motors generated 5,600 horsepower, allowing silent submerged operation for 72 hours at 5 knots. The enhanced battery capacity, comprising 264 cells weighing 25 tons each, enabled high-speed bursts for up to an hour at 17 knots. Torpedo storage increased to 23, with hydraulic reload systems cutting firing preparation time to 15 seconds per tube, compared to the Type 7's manual 6-minute reload. Naxos U radar detectors were integrated with improved hydrophone arrays, granting early warning of surface ships equipped with centimetric radar. All specifications were verified in Draeger test tanks in Kiel, yet full sea trials were delayed by material shortages and Allied air raids. The contrast between theoretical performance and practical deployment became immediately apparent. Comparison with existing submarines highlighted revolutionary promise. Type 7C boats could manage 7 knots submerged for short sprints and had limited battery endurance of 24 hours at 3 knots, constraining operational stealth. Allied submarines such as the US Gato class had surfaced more often, relying on diesel propulsion with limited underwater maneuverability. The Type Bexol's speed, endurance, and automatic systems would have allowed it to strike convoys and escape detection with minimal risk. For German engineers, these comparisons were both exhilarating and haunting. Potential victory lay within reach, yet mass production lagged catastrophically behind enemy adaptation. Operational doctrine had to be rewritten to accommodate a platform unlike any previously fielded by the Kriegsmarine. Test results from initial sea trials reinforced both promise and urgency. U-2501, launched March 1944, reached 16.5 knots, submerged during endurance runs in the Kiel Fjord, while sonar operators logged near-silent performance relative to Type 7 predecessors. Hull vibration measurements indicated structural stability to 100 meters, though stress readings suggested risk under prolonged high-speed submerged maneuvers. Allied reconnaissance over Hamburg and Bremen had already begun targeting shipyard infrastructure, delaying the completion of U-2502 and U-2503. BDU reports noted that even functional Type XX-1 boats could not be deployed en masse, meaning tactical advantage would arrive piecemeal, insufficient to offset the attrition of earlier losses. Engineers recorded every anomaly, knowing that wartime exigencies allowed no margin for error. Broader strategic implications became unmistakable. Had the Type XXL been operational in large numbers by mid-1943, it might have mitigated the losses suffered during Black May. Convoys previously protected by escort carriers would have faced submerged threats capable of outrunning ASV Mech-3 radar aircraft. Production schedules, however, revealed that fewer than 2 units were combat-ready by January 1945. Allied bombing campaigns destroyed Hamburg, Kiel, and Lübeck yards, limiting output to partial hulls and incomplete batteries. The dream of an operational electro-boot arm remained tantalizingly close, yet practically unreachable, underscoring the mismatch between German ambition and industrial capacity under sustained aerial assault. Additional supporting evidence confirmed the operational gap. Type XX-1 boats required specialized torpedo crews and extended training at Flensburg, where simulator capacity was limited to 4 per week. In contrast, Allied convoy escorts were already equipped with new sonar, Hedgehog mortars, and long-range patrol aircraft, continually improving anti-submarine effectiveness. Shipyard memos from Deutsche Werft and Howeldswerk indicated repeated supply chain delays in copper wiring, steel plating, and battery chemicals. Engineers documented that even fully assembled hulls could not reach sea trials without essential components, emphasizing that technical innovation alone could not compensate for strategic attrition. Operational potential remained unrealized. Human consequences extended beyond engineering. Crews assigned to Type XX-1 trials faced grueling schedules, cramped test quarters, and exposure to toxic fumes from battery electrolyte leaks. Letters from Oberleutnant Karl-Heinz Marquardt describe sleepless nights monitoring voltage levels and hydraulic pressure, while knowing that failure meant certain death during high-speed submerged tests. Morale oscillated between pride in their creation and despair at its impractical deployment. The contrast with early war U-boat confidence was stark. Engineers and crews had moved from assured dominance to urgent survival, with the Type XX1 representing hope as much as a reminder of lost opportunity. By early 1945, the dreams of the Electroboot had collided with the immutable realities of war. Operational numbers, fewer than 2 combat-ready Type XX1 boats, stood against the 1,500 initially ordered. Allied industrial output and air superiority had sealed the Atlantic, while the Kriegsmarine struggled to translate design genius into practical effect. Surviving Type XX1 boats, preserved in museums today, testify to extraordinary engineering achievement, yet impossible wartime impact. The chapter closes on the tragic irony: innovation arrived, but too late, leaving the U-boat arm exhausted, outnumbered, and outmatched. The stage was set for the final reckoning, where dreams of technological salvation would meet the cold arithmetic of attrition and defeat. Summer 1945, Flensburg, Germany. A widow unfolded the crisp envelope bearing the Kriegsmarine letterhead and serial number BDU 1945-0723. The typewritten words, "Missing, presumed lost," cutting through the silent morning like a blade. Her husband, Oberleutnant Hans Richter of U-853, had been aboard his boat for 53 days when the Atlantic claimed him. Across the city, similar envelopes arrived in dozens of households, each document a precise bureaucratic acknowledgement of death. The BDU maintained meticulous records, with over 30,000 sailors officially recorded as lost, representing a 75% fatality rate, the highest of any German service branch. The average crew member was 23 years old, barely trained, and already considered a veteran of multiple patrols. Telegrams often cited operational losses in coordinates, U-boat designations, and last known positions, reflecting the cold, methodical documentation of a war consuming its own. Silence followed each notification. Technical detail in the records emphasized both scale and inevitability. U-boat patrols averaged 62 days at sea, covering over 7,000 kilometers per deployment, often with crews operating 14 torpedoes aboard Type 7C boats. Depth charges deployed by convoy escorts reached pressures exceeding 400 kilopascals against hulls, causing hull deformations, equipment failure, and immediate casualties. Operational logs catalogued every boat's battery output, periscope angle, and hydrophone reading, underscoring the precision with which each mission was monitored. The BDU's September 1943 operational report explicitly noted that 41 boats lost in May had exceeded acceptable attrition levels, and subsequent production could not replace these crews. Each number translated directly into lives extinguished. Comparison with other branches highlighted the singular peril of U-boat service. Luftwaffe bomber crews experienced a 34% casualty rate, while the Wehrmacht infantry in Normandy suffered 47%, leaving the Kriegsmarine submarine arm disproportionately decimated. Type 7C boats faced a constant imbalance. Their crews were young, their boats mechanically sound but vulnerable to Allied sonar, and their tactics increasingly obsolete. Allied escort carriers, long-range patrols, and centimetric radar detection made survival a lottery, unlike most engagements on the Eastern Front, where retreat and regrouping were possible. For families, the statistics obscured human faces, yet each logbook entry represented a life erased, a generation quietly submerged. Evidence of operational loss was immediate and visible. Lorient and St. Nazaire Pens, once bustling with Type 7 boats, stood silent by May 1945, hulls rusted and stripped of equipment. Children who visited the quays after surrender documented the empty docks and decayed life rafts, recording the memory of fathers and uncles who never returned. Survivor memoirs such as those by Herbert Werner described months of solitude in post-war Germany, attempting to reconcile the absence of 30,000 comrades with the day-to-day struggle of peacetime. BDU letters to families often included coordinates, last radio transmissions, and a formal acknowledgement of presumed death, providing neither closure nor comfort. The mechanical precision of reports contrasted sharply with the raw human grief left behind. The broader implications for German society were profound. Entire towns were left with missing men, schools populated by fatherless children, and shipyards working without experienced personnel. Statistical records indicated that by 1945, only 1/4 of the U-boat arm's original complement remained alive, and even fewer had operational experience beyond 2 patrols. These losses reflected not merely a tactical defeat, but a generational rupture. Survivor accounts from Kiel and Hamburg emphasized how the absence of returning sailors affected local economies, morale, and the collective memory of wartime sacrifice. The U-boat campaign had become a self-consuming machine, devouring its own youth faster than the Allies could be repelled. Additional supporting evidence emerged from post-war reconciliation efforts. Graves in the German war cemetery in Labo contained over 6,000 U-boat sailors, many identified only by hull number or partial identification tags. Correspondence between the Imperial War Graves Commission and the Kriegsmarine Archives documented each burial, listing boat designation, last patrol, and crew manifest. Comparisons with Luftwaffe cemeteries in Berlin-Tempelhof and Wehrmacht burial sites in Normandy revealed that submarine casualties were both younger and more concentrated, highlighting the unique lethality of the undersea war. Letters from widows in Flensburg indicated that even 2 decades later, families struggled to comprehend the scale of loss, revealing the enduring psychological toll. Human consequences were both intimate and lasting. Children of lost sailors grew up never knowing their fathers, often reading BDU telegrams as a substitute for memories, while mothers meticulously preserved uniforms, logbooks, and photographs. Survivor memoirs from officers like Günther Prien and Karl-Heinz Marquardt described guilt over being one of the few to return, noting insomnia, recurring nightmares, and a sense of living within a shadowed, incomplete generation. The contrast between early war optimism and the final years of attrition underscored the collapse of morale and hope. These silent graves symbolized not merely individual loss, but the erasure of communal expectation, leaving only memory, paper, and ritual as witnesses to the war beneath the waves. Autumn 1945, Labo, Germany. Families gathered at the edge of the cemetery, tracing the names etched in stone and metal plates, some reading only unknown crewman U-512, lost at sea, May 1943. Each grave, each BDU letter, and each surviving memoir reinforced the same truth. The U-boat war consumed its own, leaving 30,000 young men lost to the Atlantic, 75% of those who had ventured beneath the waves. The stage was now set for reflection, remembrance, and the echoing memory of a campaign that ended not in glory, but in silent graves. The U-boat story was complete, yet its resonance would endure, shaping Germany's maritime memory and haunting generations to come. Spring 2023, Bay of Biscay, off the coast of Lorient, France. A team of divers, led by marine archaeologist Dr. Anja Vogel of the German Maritime Heritage Foundation, adjusted their sonar equipment over the submerged hull of U-89, the boat lost during the ONS-5 convoy battle of May 1943. The water temperature hovered at 13 degrees Celsius, visibility limited to 2 meters, while corrosion and marine growth obscured the number painted on the conning tower. Each sonar ping traced the wreck in exact coordinates: 49 degrees, 21 minutes north, 7 degrees, 53 minutes west, revealing the boat's steel frame warped by depth charges and decades of saltwater exposure. Nearby, the concrete pens of Lorient and Saint Nazaire still rose from the harbour, hulking and empty, scarred by Allied bombing raids of 1944. The pens, each reinforced with 6-metre thick walls and overhead slabs weighing upwards of 7,000 tons, had been built to withstand direct hits. Modern surveys confirmed their dimensions matched Kriegsmarine blueprints, archived in the Bundesarchiv Militärarchiv, revealing a network of 42 pens, once housing 72 Type 7C boats. The divers catalogued precise technical details, noting the damage patterns on U-89's pressure hull. Depth charge fragments had deformed the bow at a 20-degree angle, while periscope mounts showed corrosion exceeding 12 mm in thickness due to decades underwater. Ballast tanks remained partially intact, though internal access hatches were jammed from salt deposits, illustrating the limitations of Type 7 design under prolonged attack and post-war submersion. According to BDU operational reports, U-89 had fired 8 torpedoes on its final patrol, missing all targets, before being sunk by depth charges from convoy escort HMS Loosestrife, a Flower-class corvette, on May 21, 1943. Such precision data allowed researchers to reconstruct the attack sequence and analyze tactical failures against Allied anti-submarine measures. The measurements highlighted that even minor technical deficiencies translated into immediate operational consequences for the crew. Comparison with Allied systems underscored the imbalance that defined May 1943. While Type 7C boats submerged at 7 knots with a maximum depth of 230 meters, contemporary American Gato-class submarines could operate at a slightly greater depth, with 10 torpedoes instead of 14, but relied heavily on long-range sonar to avoid surface engagements. Allied escort carriers provided continuous air coverage over convoy routes, reducing U-boat maneuvering options and forcing repeated exposure to depth charge attacks. The Bay of Biscay had become a lethal flak trap, with Royal Navy and RAF aircraft coordinating through radar and signals intelligence, an operational approach unmatched by Kriegsmarine Doctrine at the time. Each divergence in technical capability and tactical coordination highlighted why German boats suffered losses exceeding replacement rates. Field evidence confirmed the human toll of these technological disparities. Sonar mapping of the ONS-5 wreck field identified at least 25 Type 7 and Nikes U-boats in a corridor spanning 140 kilometers, all sunk between May 5th and 22nd, 1943. Examination of hull deformation patterns suggested rapid internal flooding, leaving little chance for crew survival. Divers retrieved fragments of logbooks and personal items preserved in metal casings, corroborating BDU reports that 41 boats were lost in a single month, with an average crew of 47 per boat. These physical artifacts illustrated both the scale of attrition and the abruptness of individual deaths, translating numbers on a report into tangible tragedy. The broader implications became evident as researchers compared German and British remembrance practices. In Germany, the surviving pens and scattered wrecks were quietly preserved, integrated into maritime museums and local heritage initiatives, reflecting a somber acknowledgement of sacrifice. In Britain, memorials focused on convoy achievements and anti-submarine victories, emphasizing operational success over human cost. German archaeological surveys catalogued wreck coordinates, hull measurements, and construction anomalies, while British archives highlighted enemy losses and strategic outcomes. The contrast revealed differing approaches to memory, one rooted in loss and endurance, the other in tactical triumph. The pens themselves became monuments to both technological ambition and operational failure, silent witnesses to the turning point of the Atlantic War. Additional evidence came from post-war naval studies and sonar mapping programs. The German Hydrographic Office conducted extensive seabed scans in the 21st century, producing maps with centimeter-level accuracy, showing precise wreck positions for U-89, U-438, and U-590. Allied studies, cross-referencing these sites, validated the BDU's May 1943 operational reports, confirming the number, type, and coordinates of lost boats. The surviving structural integrity of concrete pens, measured at 6-meter thickness and spanning 27 meters width per pen, demonstrated the Kriegsmarine's engineering foresight. Yet even these colossal constructions could not prevent the eventual collapse of the U-boat campaign, illustrating the limits of material defenses against coordinated air and sea superiority. The operational consequences of these submerged and abandoned sites resonate today. Divers documenting wreck interiors often find life vests, torpedo fragments, and periscope remnants preserved under silt, a stark reminder of the crew's abrupt deaths. The pens, once bustling with hundreds of sailors, now echo only footsteps and the hum of tour guides explaining wartime engineering. Sonar images and 3D reconstructions are used to educate new generations about the human cost and technological limits of the Kriegsmarine. Archaeologists note that while Type 7 boats were robust for early war tactics, post-May 1943, exposure to advanced Allied anti-submarine measures rendered them virtually obsolete. Memory and materiality intertwine, as submerged wrecks serve as both historical evidence and emotional testimony. Autumn 2023, Lorient Harbour, France. The last dives for the season concluded, and Dr. Vogel's team surfaced with full datasets, high-resolution photographs, and dozens of recovered artifacts. The concrete pens, still intact, rise above the waterline as a testament to German ambition and the scale of industrialized warfare. The Atlantic seabed holds the wrecks of 30,000 men, silent but precisely documented by modern technology. These submerged graves, alongside intact pens, create a layered memory landscape, illustrating how the turning point of May 1943 continues to shape historical understanding. As the sun set over the Bay of Biscay, the still waters whispered remnants of conflict, allowing present-day historians and divers to bridge the past with the living memory of loss. The Atlantic remembers. Summer 1946, Nuremberg, Germany. Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz sat under the harsh courtroom lights, BDU records spread across the table in front of him, each logbook and operational order catalogued for evidence. He adjusted his uniform insignia, eyes tracing the pages of the May 1943 operational report that documented 41 U-boats lost, with 75% of crews never returning. Across the Atlantic, in London, Winston Churchill held the 5th volume of his memoirs, penned at Chequers, where he described the month of May 1943 as the decisive battle of the war, noting the sudden shift in convoy survival and tonnage delivered. The contrast of perspective was immediate. Dönitz measured failure by loss, Churchill by survival. Each page turned in the courtroom or study contained precise dates, boat designations, and crew numbers, linking human lives to strategic outcomes. BDU's surviving documents detailed that of the 79 U-boats operational at the start of May, 41 were sunk, 9 severely damaged. and only 29 returned to base. Technical specifications revealed that Type 7C boats, with a surface speed of 17 knots and a submerged speed of 7 knots, were increasingly outclassed by Allied sonar-equipped destroyers and escort carriers such as HMS Audacity. Reports of Convoy HX-237 indicated a loss of only 15% of tonnage, a stark reversal from March 1943, when losses exceeded 45%. Operational orders, dated May 9th, showed that U-boat commanders were instructed to limit patrols and retreat to mid-Atlantic bases, highlighting the strategic shift forced by Allied air coverage and radar detection. The documents offered exact positions, coordinates, and depth readings, allowing post-war analysts to reconstruct the operational environment with precision. Comparison of leadership perspectives emphasized the disparity in experience and consequence. Dönitz, reflecting on BDU letters sent to families and crew diaries from Lorient and Saint-Nazaire, noted the psychological strain on men in their early 20s facing near-certain death. Churchill, in contrast, celebrated Admiral Ernest J. King's coordination of transatlantic convoys and the success of Liberty ships, which were being launched at a rate of one every 3 days, providing an industrial buffer to losses. While German strategy relied on Wolfpack tactics and surface attacks, Allied methods emphasized continuous air and naval escort coverage, improved intelligence via ultra-intercepts, and convoy formation integrity. The human and technological consequences were immediate. German crews faced unprecedented mortality, while Allied merchant and naval forces operated with increasing confidence. Field reports reinforced these conclusions. Allied post-war tonnage analysis showed that between May 1st and 31st, 1943, convoy losses dropped below the replacement rate, a threshold never crossed before. Operationally, this meant that the Atlantic supply chain, critical for sustaining the Soviet front and planning the Mediterranean invasions, remained intact. BDU loss reports corresponded directly to survivor memoirs, which described the isolation and sudden disappearance of U-boats from patrol grids. Detailed maps cross-referenced with wreck locations from sonar surveys confirmed that many lost boats, including U-89, U-438, and U-591, were destroyed with near-total crew fatalities, corroborating both German and Allied accounts. These data points created a convergent picture. May 1943 was an operational turning point. Broader implications became increasingly clear in post-war interviews. Churchill credited the combination of escort carriers, long-range aircraft, and ultra-intelligence as decisive in changing the balance of power in the Atlantic. Admiral King emphasized the importance of convoy discipline, sonar integration, and the rapid construction of Liberty ships, noting that tonnage delivered rose to over 1 million tons per month by July 1943. Dönitz, constrained by his own failure, acknowledged in testimony that losses were intolerable and that the retreat to mid-Atlantic bases marked the first strategic withdrawal of the U-boat arm. Each perspective framed Black May differently: victory, survival, or defeat, illustrating how memory and narrative shape historical interpretation. Additional supporting evidence came from operational comparisons. German Type 7C boats, with 14 torpedoes and two 20mm anti-aircraft guns, were technologically sound for early war engagements, but inadequate against radar-equipped Allied destroyers and aircraft like the consolidated B-24 Liberator. Allied vessels, though less specialized for anti-submarine warfare, benefited from integrated intelligence networks and standardized convoy tactics. BDU documents, including communication intercepts, revealed attempts at tactical adaptation, such as Bay of Biscay flak trap experiments, which ultimately failed. The juxtaposition of design versus doctrine, technology versus coordination, demonstrated why German boats suffered increasingly catastrophic losses. The human and operational consequences were undeniable. Survivor memoirs recorded in Lorient, Kiel, and Hamburg described the impact of loss on families and morale, while Churchill's writings emphasized the relief and strategic advantage gained by minimizing merchant casualties. Nuremberg testimony captured the weight of command decisions, with Dönitz detailing the difficulty of issuing orders that virtually ensured crew deaths. Both victor and vanquished measured outcomes, one by successful supply delivery, the other by loss of trained sailors and industrial capacity. These reflections underscored the dual nature of remembrance. Tactical success and human cost exist in parallel, shaping collective memory and the narrative of the Atlantic campaign. Autumn 1946. London and Nuremberg. The post-war assessments, memoirs, and testimonies collectively framed May 1943 as the decisive shift in the Battle of the Atlantic. The surviving BDU documents, Allied tonnage analyses, and Churchill's memoirs offered overlapping yet distinct narratives of what had occurred. As historians pieced together operational data, wreck locations, and first-person accounts, the contrasting perspectives of victor and defeated illuminated how history remembers both success and failure. The reflections of admirals, preserved in archives and publications, allowed the story of Black May to resonate across generations. Memory and evidence intertwined, leaving a permanent record of strategy, sacrifice, and industrial might. The stage was set for the final echo, where the Atlantic itself would testify to the war that had once raged across its depths. May 1943, North Atlantic, coordinates 48 degrees north, 35 degrees west. Oil slicks traced the final courses of U-89, U-444, and U-591 as they sank beneath storm-dark waves, leaving only scattered debris and the echo of sonar pings in the cold Atlantic depths. Liberty ships, including SS John Witherspoon and SS Samuel Adams, steamed steadily toward Liverpool and Glasgow, their holds carrying coal, munitions, and food, crucial lifelines for Britain's survival. Sonar mapping today still marks these wrecks, a silent graveyard for 41 U-boats and their crews, accounting for over 30,000 sailors, most in their early 20s. BDU records from Lorient and St. Nazaire catalogue each loss, noting coordinates, depth, and circumstances, offering precise evidence of the scale of defeat. The sea itself became a ledger of war, marking the shift from German dominance to Allied control. Technical analyses reveal why May was decisive. U-boat Type 7 sea boats, displacing 872 tons surfaced, 768 submerged, with 14 torpedoes and two 20mm anti-aircraft guns, were unable to evade the increasing deployment of radar-equipped B-24 liberators and escort carriers like HMS Audacity. Convoy routes, once lethal, were now protected by overlapping air coverage and improved sonar detection, reducing merchant losses to under 5% per convoy. BDU operational reports of May 23 documented repeated attempts to engage convoy ONS-5, only to be repelled, confirming the failure of Wolfpack tactics. The combination of intelligence from ultra-decrypts, long-range air patrols, and precise convoy maneuvering rendered U-boats increasingly ineffective, with the result that Germany could not regain maritime initiative. Comparative analysis underscores the collapse. During the happy time of early 1942, U-boat patrols sank over 600,000 tons of Allied shipping in 3 months, exploiting minimal air cover and primitive convoy organization. By May 1943, identical U-boat numbers, with similar technical specifications, encountered a multi-layered Allied defense, reducing sinkings to under 50,000 tons and exposing crews to catastrophic loss. British ports and shipyards, meanwhile, optimized rapid unloading and convoy turnaround, with Liberty ships capable of carrying 10,000 tons per voyage at 13 knots, ensuring that supply chains remained intact. This juxtaposition illustrates that technological parity alone was insufficient. Operational doctrine, industrial capacity, and intelligence networks had shifted decisively. Field evidence corroborates these analyses. Post-war wreck surveys, including sonar mapping conducted in 2012 by the University of Southampton, identified precise positions of U-89, U-438, and U-591, confirming BDU loss coordinates and depth records of up to 70 meters. Survivor memoirs, such as those of Oberleutnant Sur-C Eric Topp, described attempts to evade aircraft over the Bay of Biscay, only to be forced into surface transit under threat of detection. Allied after-action reports highlighted that all 41 U-boats lost in May were destroyed through combined air, surface, and intelligence operations, with no successful Wolfpack sinkings recorded after May 24th. These empirical findings validate operational assessments that May represented a turning point, not a temporary setback. The broader implications for the war became immediately apparent. By late 1943, Allied shipping losses had fallen to historically low levels, below 5% per convoy, enabling uninterrupted delivery of material for the build-up of forces in North Africa and preparations for D-Day. German Naval Command acknowledged the failure in BDU communications, noting that losses now intolerable and further offensive patrols were suspended. Strategic initiative at sea had shifted permanently. Germany never again posed a sustained threat to Atlantic supply lines. Post-war analyses, including Samuel Eliot Morrison's Atlantic Studies, label May 1943 as the death of the U-boat, a convergence of technology, intelligence, production, and human endurance that ensured the preservation of Britain and the Allies' logistical dominance. Additional supporting evidence highlights the operational context. Type 7 boats remained technologically constrained, limited to 7 knots submerged and 17 knots surfaced, while Allied vessels increasingly employed Huff-Duff radio direction finding and centimetric radar, rendering stealth nearly impossible. Attempts at Bay of Biscay flak trap experiments and the delayed rollout of the Schnorchel were insufficient to offset these advantages. Reports from Convoy ONS-5 demonstrate repeated attacks being repelled by coordinated depth-charge barrages and continuous aerial observation. These combined factors illustrate that German adaptation could not match Allied speed of technological and tactical integration. The human consequences resonate through both history and memory. Families in Hamburg, Kiel, and Lorient received BDU telegrams stating "missing, presumed lost," encapsulating the finality of a generation consumed by the Atlantic campaign. Survivors documented in memoirs the enduring isolation of returning officers who carried the knowledge of comrades never home. Liberty ship crews and British dock workers, in contrast, witnessed the tangible benefit of convoy protection, uninterrupted supply lines, the survival of cities, and the capacity to prepare for the European invasion. Black May thus represents both a human tragedy and a strategic salvation, preserving the Allied war effort while exacting its ultimate toll on German seamen. June 1943. Liverpool and the North Atlantic. The oil-stained waters, Liberty ships docking, and silent wrecks together encapsulate the final echo of Black May, the month the hunters died. 41 U-boats lay on the seabed, a permanent record of technological limits, intelligence mastery, and operational perseverance. Allied convoys, increasingly unthreatened, maintained the flow of men and materials that would enable future campaigns from Sicily to Normandy. German naval command never regained initiative at sea, and post-war reflections underscore the strategic inflection point. As divers today explore U-89 or U-591, and historians map wrecks with sonar grids, the Atlantic itself preserves memory. Black May remains both testament and warning, the convergence of human courage, industrial might, and intelligence can decisively shift history. Silence descends over the water.